Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. Okay? A lot different. You're going to become filthy rich in the Middle Ages. Yeah, good luck with that. You probably won't survive this, and if you do, let's just say there'll be scars. Emotional, physical, and definitely spiritual. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing who's drifting off to medieval nonsense at 2:37 AM in Winnipeg. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with dirt under your nails and a back that creaks louder than a church door in January. Congratulations, you're a peasant farmer in 12th century England. You've got a scrap of land so small that birds can fly over it without even bothering to look down. You plant barley and oats, and whatever else the soil hasn't already given up on. You've never seen a coin, only heard about them in whispers, as if money is a myth only the lord in the manor knows how to summon. And yet, you dream. Not the fancy dreams, not yet, just small ones, like eating bread that isn't mostly rocks. But here's the thing, your lord, he's lazy, he's drunk. He leaves everything to his steward, who's more interested in skimming profits than farming, which means there's a power vacuum. And in the Middle Ages, power vacuums are just big gold-lined invitations. So you hustle. You're up before the sun. You figure out which grains grow faster, which lands drain better after rain, and which neighbours are one bad harvest away from giving up and selling their patch of dirt to the church. Or to you, if you move fast. And you do. You start lending tools and seed grain. Not out of the kindness of your heart, no. You make deals. 1/3 of the yield this season, 2 chickens, and rights to graze on your pasture boom. You're now a microlord with a one-sheep empire. Before long, you're organising the village. You teach others how to dig ditches to drain the lowlands. Suddenly, half the marshland is tillable, more grain, more profit. You start storing surplus. While others drink watery ale, you're buying a second-hand plough and paying some teenage orphan to use it for you. But now you hit a wall. You need access to the mill, which is owned by your lord, and it's expensive. He takes a huge cut just to grind your grain, so you go rogue. You build a hand mill in secret. Illegal? Technically, yes. Risky? Oh, absolutely. But the payoff is incredible. You stop paying mill dues and you start milling for your neighbours under the table, grinding at night, storing flour in hidden cellars. This is when you start to feel it. Not just the physical weight of coins, but the intoxicating burn of leverage. The steward notices, of course. He hears the whispers, notices that you're suddenly wearing shoes, real ones, not just bark strapped to your feet. So he snitches. Lord Fatwine, that's what everyone calls him behind his back, pays you a visit. He waddles onto your land and threatens to throw you in the stocks for operating a criminal milling enterprise, whatever that means. And you? You smile and you hand him a sack of flour, some smoked fish, and a quiet little purse with a few silver pennies inside. Lord Fatwine grins, toasts to honest farmers, and stumbles back to the manor. Welcome to corruption, your new business partner. You expand. You buy a broken cart, fix it, and start hauling grain to distant markets. There, you meet traders. Real ones. With clean fingernails and accents from 100 miles away, they introduce you to wool, England's white gold. You start eyeing sheep like a Wall Street shark eyes penny stocks. They're dumb, smelly, and insanely valuable. But sheep need grazing land, and that means fencing off the commons, the shared land. Tricky, illegal-ish. But your friends in the Lord's household help look the other way. For a fee, of course. You fence, you herd, you shear, and you sell. At first, it's to a travelling merchant with a cart full of scales and a suspicious lack of teeth. But soon enough, you're dealing directly with guild members in town. The profit, it makes grain look like child's play. One day, you realise you haven't touched a plough in months. You're not a farmer anymore, you're a businessman. Here's the historical reality. This upward mobility was rare, but not impossible. There are recorded cases of peasants becoming landlords, often through persistence, marriage, or sheer opportunism. And yes, underground mills were a thing, so were secret trades, moonlighting livestock deals and grey area grazing rights. Quirky fact. Some medieval farmers secretly bred dwarf cows to save on grazing land. Adorable and efficient. Debate time. Historians still argue whether the feudal system allowed true economic mobility. Was it possible to rise, or was the deck so stacked that even small successes were eventually crushed by taxes, tithes, and arbitrary punishment? You, however, are proving the optimistic historians right. For now, the wool hit's different. Seriously, after your first real wool shipment goes out, and that little pouch of silver clinks in your hand heavier than your conscience ever did, something changes in you. You're no longer thinking in terms of acres and barley bushels, you're thinking in bolts of cloth, export routes, and how much coin you can stuff in a hollowed-out walking stick without it making a suspicious rattle. Wool is booming. The demand is off the charts, especially from Flanders. Apparently Flemish weavers can't get enough of that thick, oily English wool. It's like medieval crypto. Everyone wants in. You, though, you're early. And that's how fortunes are made. You double down. Every coin you earn goes straight back into sheep. You're practically dreaming in bleats now. You start giving them names, not because you love them, but because inventory management is easier when you remember Gertrude had the best fleece last year. But there's a bottleneck. The local market is swamped, and the Lord's wool dues are steep. Every fleece gets taxed before it even leaves the sheep. So naturally you start looking elsewhere. That's how you discover the underground wool ring. It starts with a merchant, Petrus, who wears a hat way too large for his actual head and smells faintly of clove oil and danger. He's from Bristol, and he's got connections. He tells you about shipping wool directly to Calais using unofficial ports. You're intrigued. You're also fairly sure this is smuggling, but you're also fairly sure you're already in too deep to stop now. So you go for it. You build a hidden dock downriver, just past the bend where the church bell can't be heard. You load bundles of raw wool at night, wrapping them in rough canvas and labelling them as charity donations. Petrus' crew handles the transport, and by the time the wool reaches the continent, it's been rebranded, resold, and somehow blessed by 3 different saints. The profit margin? Insane. Your name starts floating around. Quietly, you're the wool whisperer. Not because you talk to sheep, you totally do, but because somehow you're growing a tiny empire off their backs. Historical fact, wool really was the economic engine of medieval England. It accounted for as much as 75% of the country's exports in some centuries. Entire towns got rich off sheep, especially those in the Cotswolds, where the phrase living off the sheep's back was practically a lifestyle brand. Of course, wealth breeds attention, and attention gets you inspected. A bishop's tax agent shows up in your village. He's wearing layers of velvet and suspicion. He asks questions about your flocks, your sales, your extremely new boots. You smile, offer him some cheese, and pretend you don't even know what wool is. Wool, you say? Ah yes, the fuzzy hay, right? But the man isn't stupid. He's nosing around for bribes, and you both know it, so you offer a donation to the local abbey instead, along with a few soft-spoken words about how generous you'd be feeling next month if the scrutiny mysteriously disappeared. He gets the message, disappears 2 days later, probably to inspect someone else's suspicious success. Meanwhile, you start building vertical. Not actual towers, just infrastructure. You hire shearers. You build a dyeing shed and pay a weird guy named Aldwin to learn how to turn that hideous beige fluff into rich, sellable colour. Indigo becomes your signature. People start referring to your product as blue silk, even though it's wool and very much not silk, but you let the name stick. Prestige sells. You also learn that medieval marketing is rough. Town criers, painted signs, word of mouth via monks and minstrels. So you do what any forward-thinking entrepreneur does. You pay a travelling bard to sing a song about your legendary blue wool. He's terrible, tone-deaf, and definitely drunk most of the time. But somehow the song sticks. People start asking for your wool by name. Now here's your quirky fact. One popular medieval wool merchant actually paid to have his initials woven into the fabric. An early version of branding, the church hated it. Called it vanity. But you're tempted to stitch a little goat holding a coin purse into every bolt you sell. Debate time. Some scholars argue that wool was the root of feudal decay, because as landowners and merchants got richer from sheep, they kicked peasants off farmland to make space for pasture. Others argue wool fueled growth and proto-capitalism, pushing Europe out of the feudal age. Both are probably true. Either way, it's messy, profitable, and perfect for you. But money changes things. You start dressing better. Subtly at first, heavier cloak, softer linen. Then one day you catch yourself adjusting your belt so your pouch of coins sits just right, where others can see it. You've become that guy. People notice, some admire, some resent. The priest glares at you during Mass, and there's talk that you work on the Sabbath and don't tithe enough. The kind of things that can get you socially exiled, or worse, accused of heresy if someone's in a bad mood. So you make a donation, a big one. You fund the repair of the church roof, out of the kindness of your heart. They carve your name into a wooden beam, not quite sainthood, but it keeps the whispers quiet for now. One night, after a long day of counting sheep profits and dodging local jealousy, you sit by your hearth with a steaming mug of weak ale. You think back to the first field you ploughed, the muddy boots, the shivering winters with only one decent blanket. Now you have 5. Linen. Imported. You're not just surviving anymore, you're becoming powerful. You also know it can all disappear in an instant. Fire, war, famine, or worse, tax reform. But for now, you're in the golden phase. Rich enough to dream, not yet rich enough to be a threat to the throne. Which means the real game is only just beginning. So here's where things really start to get absurd. In a profitable, possibly illegal sort of way. You've conquered the fields, mastered the sheep, outsmarted the taxman and bribed a few church mice. But now you're staring at the map on your grubby wooden table, eyeing the roads like veins pumping wealth through the kingdom. And you think, tolls, not paying them, charging them. You see, travel in the Middle Ages is dangerous and annoying. Mud-soaked roads, bandits, bridges that are somehow always broken, but still mysteriously charging a fee. The thing is, there's no centralised highway authority. If someone builds a road or bridge, they often get to charge for it. So naturally, people start building some very creative paths just to shake coins out of travellers like mead from a cask. And you? You decide to join the party. You find a narrow stretch of road between 2 towns that sees decent foot traffic. Traders, pilgrims, nobles, the occasional chicken convoy. It runs near your property. There's a rickety stream crossing. One flash flood and the entire road turns into a squishy death trap. So you generously build a small bridge. By build, we mean lash together some logs and slap a few stones on top to look convincing. Then you prop up a sign carved with shaky Latin that says something like, "Toll required, maintained by the grace of God and you." You sit there with a stool, a ledger, and the most official-looking frown you can muster. People start paying, mostly out of confusion, some out of fear. One man tries to bypass the bridge and nearly drowns his donkey in the muck. You offer him a towel for a small fee. The toll scheme booms. You hire a lad to collect coin while you sleep in. You raise the rate on feast days. You offer bundle pricing for large merchant carts. One clever knight offers you a silver brooch instead of coin. You accept, of course. You've just discovered barter exchange. Next thing you know, you're trading free passage for spices, gloves, a goose with a limp, and a mystery cheese that's probably outlawed in 3 counties. Historical fact. Toll roads in the Middle Ages were absolutely real. Lords, abbots, even towns could get royal charters to build roads and charge fees. There are records of pavage grants where people paid extra just to avoid bandits or swampy detours. And yes, fake tolls and unofficial booths were a thing. Some were sanctioned retroactively. Others got you hanged. Which is why you decide to get legit. You find a lazy nobleman, Lord Dunnington. He owns the land across the bridge, never leaves his manor, and thinks accounting is witchcraft perfect. You offer him a 20% cut of the tolls if he signs a letter declaring your bridge essential to the local economy. He agrees, mostly because you also throw in a crate of your finest blue-dyed wool. Boom! Instant legitimacy. You're now a sanctioned toll operator. But here's where it gets spicy. Word spreads. A neighbouring town accuses you of siphoning their trade. They claim your bridge is diverting merchants from their market square. They show up with pitchforks, literally. So you do what every rising mogul must. Hire muscle. You find 2 ex-soldiers with crooked noses and a suspicious amount of unclaimed armour. They guard the bridge. They call themselves Sir Garth and Sir Punchalot. They're not knights, but they do the job. You start calling your toll plaza the River Gate. Add a banner. Offer hay and drink to tired travellers. One bard calls it surprisingly hospitable. You frame that review. Quirky fact of the night. Some medieval toll bridges had actual hospitality stations, like primitive truck stops. Travellers could rest, water their animals, even hear the latest town gossip from toll clerks who were basically the Twitter of the dirt road. Now for the open debate. Some historians believe these tolls helped improve infrastructure and promoted trade. Others argue they were just legal extortion, one more way for the elite, or clever schemers like you, to squeeze peasants dry. The truth is probably both. You're improving the road, but you're also charging 3 pence to cross it. That's dinner money. Back at home, the profits start stacking up. You've got coin, influence, a growing legend. A nearby monk calls you a shrewd man of the world, which is medieval for suspicious but possibly holy. You decide to reinvest. You buy land on both sides of the river, securing your toll territory. You add a covered section to the bridge and call it a weather fee when it rains. You even install a basic weighing station to charge merchants by the pound. Nobody checks your math. Then one day, a royal messenger gallops through. He doesn't pay the toll. Your lad tries to stop him, but the man laughs and waves a scroll in his face. King's business, he says. He's carrying tax documents. Or maybe just pies. Either way, he's above your little road racket. That's your wake-up call. No matter how rich you get, there's always someone richer. Nobles, bishops, kings, people who can wipe your profits off the map with a single decree. You decide it's time to diversify. One revenue stream is dangerous. Multiple, that's safety. But for now, you sip cider by your bridge, watching carts clatter past, coin jingling into your satchel like a lullaby. You built a road, charged people to use it, and convinced them it was fair. You're not just rich, you're becoming an institution. You know what smells like money in the Middle Ages? Beer-soaked wood, ink-stained parchment, and burning incense, because tonight you're joining the monks. Not as a pious soul seeking salvation, no. You're here for the land, the wealth, and the most underappreciated side hustle in medieval Europe, being absurdly rich while pretending you've renounced earthly possessions. Let's set the scene. You roll up to the gates of a large Benedictine monastery, wearing your most repentant expression and your least offensive tunic. You've memorized a few Bible verses just in case, but mostly you're banking on your ability to fake humility while secretly sizing up the place like a new business acquisition. And oh, what a place it is. Stone towers, walled gardens, granaries packed to the rafters, their own freaking fish ponds. The monks say they've taken vows of poverty, but they're living like the top 1% of the spiritually elite. You step through the cloister and see scribes hunched over books worth more than the entire villages, and wine cellars stocked deeper than your old toll booth's ledger. It hits you. Monasteries in the Middle Ages weren't just spiritual centres, they were multinational corporations in robes. You play your part, you kneel, you pray, you peel potatoes, you learn how to chant badly but enthusiastically, and behind the scenes you watch how the money flows. It's brilliant. Donations, tithes, deathbed land gifts from guilty nobles, fees for prayers, rent from peasants on monastery-owned land. It's like watching passive income on divine steroids. Historical fact. By the 13th century, monasteries owned a third of all arable land in England. That's right. 1 in 3 fields, meadows or forests had some silent monk quietly collecting rent behind the scenes. These weren't just guys in sandals, they were landlords, lenders and large-scale economic players. You start small, you volunteer to help with inventory. Suddenly you're in the archive room, flipping through pages of records so detailed they list how many eggs Brother Edmund owes in tithe this month. And the kicker? Most of this wealth is untaxed. The church has immunity from a lot of the crown's grubby little demands, which means the monastery is a vault, and you're now inside. You get clever. You propose a new system to track grain storage and rental income. It's completely fake, but it sounds impressive. The abbot approves it just to shut you up, and now you've got access to every financial detail in the place, and you start siphoning, not stealing, just redirecting, over-reporting harvest failures, misplacing rent, charging extra fees to tenants and pocketing the difference. When a noble donates silver candlesticks, you have one melted down and replaced with polished tin. No one notices. The monks are too busy arguing about how many angels can dance on a millstone. Meanwhile, you're building quiet connections outside. Merchants, scribes, a moneylender with an eye patch who swears he's not cursed. You start laundering monastery wealth into little side ventures. A candle shop here, a vineyard there, a charming inn with suspiciously cheap ale, and astonishingly loud minstrels. The best part? If anyone catches you, you just confess. Guilt's a currency here. Oh, Brother Elias, you've been hoarding wool profits again. Yes, Abbot, I was tempted. The devil, you know. Very well. 3 days of fasting and copying psalms. Boom. Debt paid. You're back in business by the weekend. Here's your quirky twist. Some monks actually did brew beer and sell it. Under the radar or under divine guidance. In fact, a few monasteries became so known for their brews that they're still producing it today. Yes, that Trappist ale your cousin drinks at parties started as a side hustle in a cloister. Now the scholarly debate: were monasteries corrupt land hoarders or essential social stabilizers? Some historians say they exploited the poor while pretending to pray, others argue they preserved knowledge, supported local economies, and offered the only real healthcare around. You, of course, are on both sides of the argument, depending on which one makes you richer that week. Then one day, opportunity knocks, or rather, bleeds. A noble dies without heirs. His estate per his final wishes goes to the church. The abbot is thrilled, but overwhelmed. You offer to manage the property transition. In the process, you pocket a silver goblet, 3 bolts of fine cloth, and a set of keys to a manor that, accidentally, ends up under your name in the monastery's ledger. And no one blinks. You're now the de facto lord of a tiny estate on the edge of town. Legally? Murky, but spiritually? The monks say it's divine favour. You start hosting quiet retreats there, invite wealthy patrons to come pray, reflect, and casually invest in your latest sheep and wool venture. You serve monastery ale, roast goose, and offer indulgences for dessert, and it's a success. You're laundering holiness into hard currency, and everyone's too busy praising your piety to ask questions. But there's tension. A new prior arrives, young, intense, and extremely into reform. He starts asking questions. Why are tithes down? Why is there a new stained glass window in your personal quarters? Why does your penance diary read more like a shopping list? You feel the walls closing in, so you start planning your exit. Not a retreat, an ascension. If you can get appointed abbot, you become untouchable. You'll be at the top of the Holy Pyramid, and if not, well, there's always another monastery down the road with fewer questions and a bigger cellar. You kneel at Vespers that night, hands folded, face solemn, but your mind is racing with gold, grain, and getaway routes. You're a monk now, a monk with a manor, a smuggling operation, and an offshore account made entirely of sheep. The smell of roasted lamb and betrayal fills the hall tonight. You're not in the monastery anymore. Nope. You've done what every upwardly mobile schemer in the Middle Ages eventually considers. You marry up, or more precisely, you aim to marry up. Because while your heart may flutter at the idea of true love, your brain is already doing dowry math in the background. This isn't a fairy tale. This is asset acquisition with extra vows and slightly more embroidery. Here's the play. Now that you're out of the monastery, don't worry. We'll say you had a crisis of vocation. You're back in the secular world with a tidy fortune, multiple revenue streams, and an urgent need for social legitimacy. Coin is great, but in the Middle Ages, coin plus a noble title, that's your ticket to real power. So you start sniffing around the local gentry, minor nobles, land-rich, cash-poor types who have more titles than teeth. Their daughters are your target, not the cloistered ones, you've had enough monasteries for a lifetime, but the ones whose families need a miracle disguised as a marriage proposal. Enter Lady Cressida. She's technically a baron's daughter. Technically. Her father's estate has been mortgaged to the bone. The family crest has been sold twice. They have one falcon, and it's blind. But Cressida, she's clever, pretty, and most importantly comes with a dowry that includes land, a dilapidated but strategic manor, and access to 3 annual fairs that bring in a ridiculous number of merchants. You start courting. And by courting, we mean flooding her family with wine, wool, and whispered promises about rebuilding the family legacy. You show up with gifts, salted fish, imported honey, a pair of dyed slippers that definitely did not come from the monastery cellar, and they buy it. Within months, the wedding bells ring, tinny and cracked, but bells nonetheless. You marry Lady Cressida in a church stuffed with debt collectors disguised as distant cousins. You say the vows, you fake a tear, you avoid making any promises about monogamy. Everyone knows how that goes. And just like that, you're in. You've married into nobility. Now here's your historical fact. Marrying up was one of the few reliable ways for non-nobles to rise in status. It didn't always stick. Laws varied by region and century, but it could get you land rights, a better legal standing, and most importantly, access to royal or courtly circles. Of course, it wasn't all lace and lute music. You move into the manor, and manor is a generous word. The roof leaks, the granary is infested. There's a ghost in the pantry who insists he used to be a duke. You suspect it's just the steward with a sheet over his head, angling for a raise. But the land is gold. It's near a river. It's got grazing rights, forest rights, and the very best part, a right to hold a market fair. 3 times a year, merchants flood in, you build better stalls, you charge for booth space, you even start your own line of sausages just to upstage the Butchers' Guild. You're not just wealthy, you're now Lord Adjacent. And that changes things. Suddenly people bow when they see you. You get invited to hunting parties. A friar starts writing poems about your noble rise. Your wife's family stops referring to you as that sheep man. Even the local bailiff lets you slide when your carts block the village road. But Lady Cressida is no fool. She sees what you're doing, and to her credit, she's not upset. She just wants in. She proposes an expansion of the estate brewery, suggests a deal with a spice trader she accidentally met at her embroidery circle. She's savvy, dangerous even. You start to respect her, maybe even like her, which is useful because the plague is about to hit. Yes, the plague. It rolls through the countryside like divine punishment on wheels. People start dying in clusters. Whole villages vanish. Your toll booth is abandoned. The monastery shuts its doors. Even the market fairs go quiet. For most, this is the end. But not for you. You pivot hard. You and Cressida buy up the land of dying neighbours. Cheap. Sometimes free, if the heirs are dead or disappeared. You pay priests to forge land titles. You adopt orphaned peasants to work the fields. You even set up a travelling funeral service. Respectful, fast, and reasonably priced. You're turning death into real estate. Here's your quirky fact. After the Black Death, some survivors did in fact get wildly rich. With so many people gone, labour was scarce, land was cheap, and inheritance laws got. Flexible peasants became landowners, widows became power players, and a few ex-monks, just saying, made suspiciously good deals. But now we hit the debate. Was this kind of opportunism moral? Some historians argue that savvy land grabbers after the plague helped reshape the economy, making it more efficient. Others say they were parasites, feeding off tragedy. You light a candle for the dead, while expanding your portfolio. One evening you and Cressida sip wine by a fire that's crackling in a hearth you definitely didn't pay for. She asks what you want next. More land? A title? You look into the fire and say, I want to be too big to fail. She raises her goblet. To ambition, she says. You clink. Outside, the wind howls through the ruined village you now own. The air smells like winter and charcoal, and somewhere out there, someone else is about to lose everything. You'll be ready to buy it. There's a certain music to hammering iron, clang, hiss, clang, that sings straight to your newly noble heart. You're done pretending to be pure forget fancy goblets and seasonal fairs. Tonight, you're trading velvet for soot and slipping into the world of forge-fired fortunes. Welcome to the blacksmith's life. Or rather, the life behind the blacksmith. See, you're not actually swinging a hammer anymore. Not with those manicured merchant hands. But you own the forge now. Bought it from a smith who drank too much mead and accidentally insulted a baron's horse. Poor guy left town. You helped him pack. You inherit his tools, his apprentices, and most importantly, his quiet little side hustle. Weapon smuggling. Yeah, we're doing that now. The forge itself is legitimate. You make horseshoes, ploughshares, and church bells that ring slightly off-key. You keep the neighbours happy by offering free repairs every Saint's Day. But behind the forge, deep in the coals, you're cooking up something hotter than any peasant hoe. Blades, daggers, short swords, even spear tips, all unmarked, unregistered, and destined for the black market. Turns out your local noble has been tightening control over private arms, probably afraid of peasants rising up with pitchforks, and rightly so, given how many you quietly supply. But it's not just weapons. Oh no, you've also got a sideline in forging coins, literally. Your smith, a grimy genius named Tobin, used to be a royal mint apprentice before he accidentally duplicated the bishop's seal. He escaped with his fingers intact but hasn't touched a real coin since. Just makes the fake ones now. You run a simple scheme. Melt down cheap metals, add just enough silver to pass inspection, then weather the coins in pig manure for that authentic circulated look. Disgusting. Absolutely. Effective. Incredibly. Your coins are now in 3 towns and 1 monastery. Tobin insists on calling them blessings. You let him. Here's your historical fact. Coin clipping and counterfeiting were rampant in the Middle Ages. Some blacksmiths were executed for it. Others just paid the right bribes. The penalty? Harsh. We're talking branding, mutilation, or straight-up hanging, but when a forged coin passes through 10 hands before someone notices, who's to blame? You set up shop at night markets. Travelling tinkerers carry your blades hidden in false bottom carts. Coins get slipped into donation plates. You even bribe an old woman to cry loudly about robbers in the woods to drum up dagger sales. It works, and soon you attract attention. Not the loud, torch-wielding mob kind, yet, but whispers. There's a man. He works in the shadows, sells weapons, deals in coin. They call you the Anvil, which is way cooler than the nickname you had back in Tollbooth days. Goat Purse, if you were wondering. Business is good, too good. One night a stranger arrives at your manor. He's wearing a cloak so thick it could double as a tent and speaks like he's got a scroll jammed up his nose. He's an agent of the crown. Or maybe not. He's vague. Talks about needing supplies for a private militia that doesn't technically exist. Offers you more gold than your cellar can hold, plus immunity, if you can produce 50 swords in 2 weeks. You smile politely, then spend the next hour in the forge screaming. Because here's the problem. You don't have the metal, or the labour, or the time, so you get creative. You send out messengers, round up every out-of-work smith in 5 villages. You borrow iron from church fences, carriage wheels, and yes, one very large gate you swore you didn't touch. You keep the forges running day and night, fueled by charcoal and spite. You meet the deadline, barely. The stranger returns, counts every blade, weighs the payment, nods once, leaves, and then nothing. Days go by, weeks. You half expect soldiers to storm your estate. Instead, you get silence, and a sack of gold left in your stable, with a note. More to come. You've officially gone full medieval arms dealer. Now here's your quirky fact. Some blacksmiths in the Middle Ages were believed to possess magical powers because of their ability to transform metal with fire. In some villages, they were both feared and revered. Tobin loves this. Starts wearing weird necklaces and telling apprentices to bless the hammer. You let him whatever keeps him working. But this leads to your latest problem. Trust. You've built a business on secrets, and secrets require silence. Your apprentices are getting curious. Your steward is asking why the forge books don't match the coin chest. Even your wife, Lady Cressida, raises an eyebrow when you add another hidden door to the wine cellar. You start sleeping lightly. Keep a dagger under your pillow. You test every cup of ale before sipping. Because the more you earn, the more dangerous the climb becomes. That's the scholarly debate here. Did middle-tier entrepreneurs in the Middle Ages really have a shot at long-term power? Some argue yes. Merchants and skilled tradesmen laid the groundwork for the bourgeoisie. Others say they were constantly under threat, rising just high enough to be noticed and crushed. You sharpen your own blades now. You host a dinner for the bishop. Serve him the finest goose, pour the smoothest wine, then send him home with a gift, a custom candlestick that just so happens to be forged from the same iron as your latest batch of spears. Symbolic? Sure. A warning? Maybe. But you're playing both sides now. Nobleman by day, forge master by night, and just slippery enough to survive either world. As the forge crackles and the smoke curls into the starless sky, you stare into the flame, wondering, not if you'll be caught, but when, and what price you'll pay to stay ahead of it. You wake to the smell of crushed grapes and something sticky squelching under your boots. You're not in the forge anymore, friend. You're standing knee-deep in half-fermented sludge, and, congratulations, you're now the proud owner of a failing vineyard. Oh yes, this is what rich people do now. You've bought land with a view. But this place, it's a disaster. The vines are neglected. The barrels leak. The only thing this vineyard has produced lately is mould, angry bees, and a drunk caretaker named Giselbert who's allergic to sunlight and basic hygiene. You find him snoring in a broken press, mumbling about the golden vintage of 47. You have no idea if he means wine or war. Still, there's potential here. You can feel it. Not in your soul, you sold that for toll money a while ago, but in your banker's bones. See, wine isn't just a drink in the Middle Ages. It's a social lubricant, a spiritual offering, a symbol of status. Nobles demand it, priests bless it, merchants toast with it. And monks? They're practically bathing in the stuff. If you can revive this vineyard, brand it well, and convince the right people it's exclusive, you'll have nobles drinking from your cup and pouring gold back into your purse. So you roll up your sleeves and get to work. First, you fire Giselbert. Not because he's incompetent, though he absolutely is, but because he's started referring to himself as the Vine Whisperer, and that's just not something you can support in good conscience. Then you hire a real viticulturist, or at least a guy who claims to have tasted over 40 wines and can read Latin upside down. He says his name is Lucas, but he writes it with 3 different spellings, doesn't matter. He talks fancy, and that's what wine needs. Someone who can say things like robust nose and hints of elderberry without flinching. You rebuild the trellises, drain the swampy fields, and even import a few rare grape cuttings from France. Bribing a monk with honey and wool, you start fermenting in cleaner barrels and, get this, you actually taste the stuff and it's awful, like if vinegar and wet dog had a baby. But you smile, nod and say, promising structure, and Lucas agrees. Very promising, he lies. Here's your historical fact. Medieval winemaking was rough, hygiene was spotty, storage was primitive, and grapes often fermented in open vats with all the charm of a communal bath. The wine turned sour fast, which is why people added spices, honey, and sometimes chalk to salvage the flavour. You get smart. You mix local wine with imported sweeteners. You age it longer. You experiment with clay jars buried underground. Roman style, you tell buyers. You invent names like Crimson Saint and Eleanor's Embrace and slap on handmade labels with little angels who look like they regret everything. Then, the real genius move, exclusivity. You don't sell your wine in bulk. Oh no. You deliver it by hand, to bishops, minor nobles, even a wealthy widow known for throwing garden parties where no one gardens. You arrive with 2 bottles, a bow, and an invitation to buy more if supplies last. Spoiler, they don't. Because you've created scarcity where there was none. And now people are fighting over your vinegar dog blend like it's liquid gold. You build a cellar, add a tasting room, host private samplings lit by candlelight, with Gregorian chants playing softly in the background. Someone faints. You call it transcendental flavour. Lucas starts wearing a robe. People believe it. And your wine becomes a brand. But here comes your quirky fact. Some medieval nobles believed that wine grown under certain astrological signs tasted better. You lean into this, print tiny horoscopes for each bottle. This vintage was bottled during a Sagittarius moon. Best served to lovers or heretics. People love it. Sales skyrocket. Even the church buys in. You offer a special sanctified reserve, aged in barrels blessed by a monk who may or may not be a goat herder named Emmerich wearing borrowed robes. You don't care. You're in the wine business now. And wine? Wine is power. Here comes the debate. Did medieval wine really matter economically, or was it just a luxury good for the elite? Some historians say it was central to trade and diplomacy. Others argue it was mostly for show, like medieval avocado toast. Either way, you're making a killing. But wine invites a different kind of danger. Nobles. Real ones. With rings and swords and opinions. One Lord Rolf of Drayford invites you to his hall for a casual tasting. Casual, in this case, involves 20 armoured men, a lute player, and a goose walking in circles for no reason. Rolf sips, then nods slowly. He offers to buy your vineyard outright. You decline. He doesn't like that. You spend the next few weeks dodging subtle threats, accidental fires near your grape fields, broken barrels that mysteriously leak only the best batches, and a note from someone calling themselves the Grape Reaper. Cute. So, you fight back the only way you know how. Bribery and social warfare. You gift free cases to his rivals. You fund a bard to write a ballad implying Rolf's wine turns men infertile. You make quiet donations to the bishopric, and soon Rolf's estate is under investigation for morally questionable grape practices. He backs off, and you expand. 1 vineyard becomes 3. You set up a trade deal with a merchant from Genoa. You build a wine press that takes 4 men to operate and sounds like someone screaming into a bucket. You don't care. It's money. It's prestige. And it all started with a half-dead vine and a barrel full of lies. Now you're drinking your own label by firelight, watching the stars shift overhead, wondering what comes next. You're not just a merchant anymore. You're a taste, a legend in a bottle, a vintage no one saw coming. You know you've made it when people start asking you for loans, especially people who wear velvet and have their own family crests. Welcome to medieval banking. Tonight you're putting away the wine goblet and pulling out the ledger. No more sheep, no more swords, no more grape-induced daydreams about being the Dionysus of Devonshire. This time, your wealth is paper-deep and numbers thick, and the power you wield isn't sharp or armoured. It's subtle, cold, and terrifying. It starts small, like all dangerous things do. A merchant from Flanders asks for a short-term loan to restock his textiles after a warehouse fire. You've got the coin. You say yes. He offers to pay you back double in 6 months. You agree, partly because you don't think he'll survive 6 months in Flanders, which is basically the medieval version of under-renovation by war. But he does pay you back, early, and now you have a new idea. You set up a discreet desk in the corner of your manor's library. Nothing flashy, just a chair, a lockbox and a set of parchments with terrifying math scrawled all over them. You call it your lending office, and before you can blink it's buzzing, because no one has cash anymore. Not after the plague, not after the recent nightly tournament that turned half the countryside into a mud puddle with broken lances. But you do, and people want it, desperately. Soon you're loaning money to peasants for seed grain, to merchants for ship repairs, and, here's the kicker, to nobles who need to pay off their tournament debts or their second cousin's ransom. You set the terms, 20% interest, 2-month repayment, collateral required. If they flinch, you smile. If they argue, you show them the waiting list. They all cave. Because in a feudal system, when someone gets too rich to ignore, they become a problem. You're now that problem. Historical fact. Medieval Europe was weird about money lending. Technically, charging interest, usury, was banned by the church. But everyone did it anyway, especially the Jews, who were often restricted to money-lending jobs because Christians couldn't legally lend interest to each other. Eventually, Christians got sneaky and started calling interest fees, or late penalties. You take this to Olympic levels. You create storage fees, risk premiums, and expedited coin transport tariffs. At one point, someone pays you 30% interest on a cheese loan. That's not even finance. That's dairy blackmail. Soon, you start issuing notes, handwritten IOUs marked with your seal. A man in York hands one to a merchant in London, who brings it to you and collects coin. You just invented regional credit. The mayor calls you the coin father. You pretend to hate it. You absolutely love it. Quirky fact, there were real medieval families who built wealth through banking, like the Medici. They mastered interest-free workarounds and wielded so much economic power they made popes dance to their tune. You're not dancing yet, but you're definitely humming. And then one day, something changes. A bishop arrives. Not just any bishop. The bishop. Rings on every finger, voice like judgment. He brings a young clerk and a big book, sits down across from your desk and says, with a kind of calm that makes your spine itch, "Let's talk about souls and silver." He opens the book. Inside, names, dates, amounts. You recognize every single one. Your borrowers, your clients, your empire, and your name at the top, underlined in a red that smells suspiciously like blood. He says it plainly. The church knows. You're practicing usury. Technically heresy. Technically punishable. Technically negotiable. You nod. Offer him a drink. Pour the sanctified reserve you invented during your vineyard days. Say something smooth like, "Surely good work should not be punished for being effective." He smiles, and then asks for a loan. That's right, the bishop is in debt. The cathedral roof collapsed mid-sermon. The stonemasons are threatening to unionize. He needs coin, quietly and quickly. You name your terms, he accepts. You're now financing the church. And that, my friend, is the game changer. Because when you've got clergy and nobility in your debt, you don't just own money, you own influence. You start funding politics. You bankroll a knight's bid for a minor council. He wins. You fund a scribe's journey to Rome. He returns with documents that just happen to favour your vineyard's export rights. You even donate a new chapel to your village, and somehow end up with exclusive rights to the market square next door. You build what looks like charity but functions like chess. People stop seeing you as just rich. They start seeing you as inevitable, and that's where the debate comes in. Did medieval moneylenders really hold that much sway? Some scholars argue they were tolerated but kept at the margins, rich but reviled. Others say they were puppeteers behind kings, masked in gold and parchment. You're not in the margins. You're centre stage, running the economy from a candlelit study that smells faintly of ink, ambition, and the lingering stress of your first forged coin. You've even started investing in wars. Small ones, feudal skirmishes, rival town squabbles. You lend coin to both sides, sell weapons to one, wine to the other. You win either way. Your risk now is visibility. Your name is everywhere. on parchment, on barrels, on the lips of peasants who owe you coin and nobles who owe you silence. So you build a network. Messengers, scribes, lawyers. One surprisingly violent nun who handles your late repayments with both divine and physical intervention. You call it your order. Other people call it what it is, the beginnings of a medieval banking syndicate. At night you sit by the fire, flipping through accounts that stretch across towns, rivers, even borders. You sip the wine that started your empire and listen to the wind rattle your window panes. You've learned the truth. Swords win battles, but numbers win everything else. The battlefield smells like old blood and fresh opportunity. You're not in the battle, mind you. Let's not be ridiculous. You're watching from a safe distance, on a small hill, under a very fashionable pavilion with your coat trimmed in ermine and a cup of mulled wine in hand. Below, two banners clash. Sir Tancred of Westmore and some other armoured guy who probably owes you money. Both sides paid for their weapons, you know this because you sold them. But tonight you're not just a merchant or a banker or a vineyard overlord with god-tier ledgers. Tonight you're a mercenary broker, and it's about to make you richer and more hated than ever. Let's back up. It starts with a letter. A desperate noble, Sir Tancred himself, needs men, not peasants with pitchforks, real soldiers, the kind who wear mismatched armour, speak 5 languages badly, and are never quite sure what flag they're fighting under. In short, mercenaries. You know a few, well, more than a few. Over the years you've quietly bankrolled enough petty wars and village feuds to build a whole contact list of violent professionals with flexible morals you write to them. Offer contracts, bonuses for loyalty, extra if they don't switch sides mid-battle. They arrive a week later, smelly, loud, efficient. They call themselves the Company of the Spiked Moon. Their leader Arnulf wears a dented breastplate and a necklace made from the teeth of his enemies, or possibly pigs you don't ask. You're not just the supplier anymore, you're the employer. You draw up terms, a 10% cut of whatever loot they seize, a flat rate for combat appearances, a bonus for keeping Sir Tancred alive until at least the 3rd day of battle. They grumble but sign. Mercenaries are like goats, hard to manage but valuable if you keep them fed and pointed in the right direction. And it works. Sir Tancred wins, barely. The mercs pillage modestly, by medieval standards, which means only 2 villages get burned and no churches looted. You take your cut. Gold, livestock, a small chest of gemstones that probably belong to someone's widow Arnulf hands you a severed finger with a ring still on it. You politely decline. Then something happens you didn't plan for. The losing noble, Sir Emery of Greymarch, sends you a letter. It says, "Would that I had hired your services first," and includes a gift, a tapestry of St. Michael stabbing a demon. The demon has your nose. You laugh. But you also see it clearly now. These nobles don't just want mercenaries as they want you, your connections, your funds, your logistics, your ability to quietly move 100 trained killers from one end of the kingdom to the other without anyone noticing until it's far too late. So you start building your own free company, not just Arnulf's goons. You want a brand. You find disbanded knights, ex-guards, runaway squires with a taste for blood and no taste for politics. You offer pay, loot shares, a place in a growing military network that doesn't care about banners, only results. You call it the Iron Veil. You hire a herald, create a sigil, a black tower with no doors. You commission matching cloaks, and, because branding is everything, you give each member a silver ring stamped with your mark. The message is clear. Hire them, you hire you. Historical fact. Free companies were real and terrifying, especially in the 14th century. These were roving bands of mercenaries, often ex-soldiers, who fought for whoever paid best. When no one paid, they raided towns for sport. Some were so powerful they held castles and negotiated with kings. You're halfway there. Quirky fact. One notorious medieval mercenary leader, John Hawkwood, was so respected that even enemies requested he spare their villages before fighting. He had an actual customer service reputation. You start requiring your troops to hand out tokens after each battle. You've been veiled. Thank you for your cooperation. The money pours in. Nobles want muscle. Merchants want caravan protection. Even a bishop hires your company to escort a relic across hostile territory. You escort it right into your own wine cellar for an unscheduled layover, and no one dares object. And here comes the debate. Did mercenaries destabilize the Middle Ages, or were they a necessary evil in a world full of bad kings and weak militias? Some historians argue they created chaos, Others say they enforced order where crowns failed. You lean toward the second. Because when someone pays you to protect their lands, you don't ask if the rebellion is just. You ask, how many tents? What terrain? And would they prefer flaming arrows or basic intimidation? The church grumbles. They say your mercenaries are soulless men. So, you donate a statue, a big one. It's St. George. He's stabbing a dragon that looks suspiciously like your main competitor's family crest. You're now selling protection, which in medieval terms means you're officially in the business of both starting wars and ending them for a fee. At a feast celebrating your latest peacekeeping success, you sit beside 3 nobles who all hired you to attack each other last month. They laugh, toast, and ask about your wine exports. Nobody mentions the burning village, because you're no longer a common merchant. You're a power broker, one who commands armies without raising a sword. You walk the line between noble and outlaw, saviour and tyrant, one well-funded manoeuvre away from rewriting a kingdom's borders. And tonight, as you count a chest full of coin that used to belong to a rebel baron whose castle your iron veil just flattened, you realise something. You could start a war now, not for profit, for practice, for fun, for control, but you don't, not yet. Instead, you raise a goblet and toast the bloodied, bruised survivors across the room. To peace, you say, and they all nod. Because for now, peace is profitable. So you've sold wool, wine, and war. You've bent the church, married your way into nobility, and now command a mercenary army with a customer loyalty program. Naturally, the next step is obvious. You pivot to medicine. Well, medicine. So you don't need to be a healer to make money in medieval health. You just need to look the part. Robes, herbs, maybe a deer skull nailed to a staff for dramatic effect. Welcome to the most gloriously unregulated business of the age. Miracle cures, elixirs, and medieval multi-level marketing. It begins at a plague-ravaged village. Your mercenaries are passing through. Everyone's coughing up blood, and the local priest is offering spiritual remedies, which basically means whispering at dying people while trying not to die himself. You, meanwhile, spot the opportunity like a wolf spotting a very sick, slightly wealthy lamb. You send in a man dressed in flowing robes dyed with indigo and reeking of sage and mystery. He calls himself Master Lucian. He was your 3rd best bookkeeper 2 weeks ago. Now he's your travelling apothecary. He arrives with flair, claiming he's been sent by a distant order of healing brothers, and that he brings knowledge passed down from Alexandria. Is any of it true? Of course not. But it doesn't need to be. He pulls out small vials of rose-coloured liquid, which he calls Elixir of the Moon's Mercy, and offers free samples to the sickest-looking villagers. Do they feel better? Not really. But they think they do, and that's the trick. You realise medieval people, just like modern ones, are suckers for hope, so you bottle it. You open an herbal remedy shop in the next town, hire a scribe to draw up absurd labels, Drake's Root, for fevers of the black humours, powdered unicorn horn, for impotence and taxation stress. You don't say it's actual unicorn, but you don't say it's not. Sales explode, and you don't just sell to peasants. Nobles eat this stuff up, especially the fortified wines laced with opium and saffron. You invent a special line just for ladies, the Duchess's Secret, which is basically mulled wine with cinnamon and clever branding. Here's your historical fact. Medieval medicine was a bizarre cocktail of science, guesswork, and astrology. People believed illnesses were caused by imbalances in the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Treatments included leeches, enemas, prayer, and occasionally drinking crushed emeralds. You sell all of that, including crushed emeralds. You tell people it's ground sky stone. It's actually green glass from your old wine bottles. Then you get really smart. You start training apprentices, not to heal, but to sell. You give them travelling kits, vials, scrolls, diagrams of vaguely human organs. You teach them a few Latin phrases and a lot of confident nonsense. Each of them buys their starter satchel directly from you. Congratulations, you've invented the medieval MLM. Each apprentice earns coin and recruits new sellers, passing a cut back up the chain. They wear coloured belts based on their healing rank. The peasants eat it up. Even the monks are confused. But then comes your quirky fact. One actual medieval physician swore that burying a toad in a silk bag around your neck would cure the plague people did it, and paid for it. You offer a luxury version, toad satchels, cured in lavender and sold with a handwritten prayer scroll. They sell out in a week. You begin publishing a healing guide, ghost-written under the name Brother Aldrich the Wise. It's full of diagrams, testimonials, and just enough real-sounding Latin to feel authentic. It spreads faster than the pox, copied by scribes, shared in monasteries, sold in city markets. The church is suspicious, of course. A bishop calls your cures spiritual theatre, so you send him a complimentary crate of blessed oil of St. Lupus, made from crushed olives and a single feather from a dead crow you found behind the barn. He writes you a thank you letter and orders more, but danger lurks. A real physician, trained in Salerno, educated and deeply annoyed, starts calling your operation a mockery of the healing arts. He tries to get your shops shut down, so you pay a bard to write a song about him getting sick from his own remedies. It becomes a hit. Dr. Wormwood's flatulent remedy is now a tavern favourite. He leaves town in disgrace. You keep expanding. You invent new syndromes, wandering womb, liver madness, night spine. You sell remedies for all of them. You launch a nighttime line of cures, moondraft, shadow soothers, and whispers of the poppy. People now come to your healing caravan, a travelling miracle clinic with flags, music, and a man who pretends to be blind and then sees, after drinking your elixir, it's theatre. It's scam. It's the hottest ticket in town. But here's your debate. Was medieval folk medicine a con or a form of therapy? Some scholars say it preyed on ignorance. Others argue it offered comfort when real medicine was even worse. After all, does it matter if it's fake, if it helps? You start to wonder, just a little, at night. As you sip your own sleeping draught, yes, the expensive one, you ponder the morality of your miracle empire. Are you helping? Are you hurting? Then you hear the clink of coin in the counting room, and decide that for now, morality can take a rain check. Because you're not just selling hope, you're bottling belief. And belief, as you've now learned, is the most addictive substance in the medieval world. The moment the guildmaster walks into your shop, flanked by two stony-faced apprentices and a man holding a suspiciously detailed ledger, you know the honeymoon phase is over. You've gotten too successful. Again. This time, it's not the church or a noble or a jealous apothecary. It's the guild, and they do not like what you're doing. See? Guilds in the Middle Ages are like mob families, but with more aprons. They control who works, what gets made, how much it costs, and, most importantly, who's allowed to profit. There's a guild for everything. Blacksmiths, butchers, weavers, cobblers, candle makers, professional mourners, even one for people who make combs out of bone. No joke. And you, bless your ambitious little soul, have been stepping on all of their toes. You've undercut prices, poached clients, sold unauthorized goods, skipped dues, and, this is the big one, never officially joined. You wave politely, offer wine. The guildmaster declines. His apprentices sniff. You know what this is. A warning. So you decide to play the long game again. You send a quiet donation to the guild's feast fund. You publicly praise their craftsmanship at the next town council meeting. You even stage a little display at your herb shop showcasing guild-certified tools, half of which you made up. Then you apply for membership. They scoff, but you insist. You write a glowing self-recommendation complete with fabricated testimonials from dead tradesmen. Eventually they cave. But you don't just join the guild. You take it over. You start small. Befriend a few older members. Offer to help with the accounts, modernize the books, bring in extra coin by suggesting donation-based dues for newcomers. Sounds nicer than a tax, right? Then you stage a vote. Claim the current leadership is mismanaging resources. You pad the room with apprentices who owe you favours and cast your name into the ring for guildmaster. Boom! You win. And just like that, you've hacked one of the most powerful institutions of the medieval economy. Historical fact. Guilds weren't just professional clubs. They held immense political and economic power. They could set prices, enforce monopolies, and lobby local rulers. Being a guildmaster was like being mayor, banker, and judge rolled into one. Assuming you could read, which you can now, you've been tutoring, but you're not here to play it safe. You restructure the entire guild. Introduce tiers, gold, silver, and copper membership, each with its own benefits. You offer certification scrolls for a small fee. You even start offering guild insurance. If a shop burns down, you help rebuild. And by help, you mean you now own 30% of their business. Some members resist. You call them backward. One of them tries to challenge you at the town square. You accuse him of price fixing and summon a priest to mediate. He mysteriously leaves town 2 days later. Here comes your quirky fact. Some medieval guilds had secret rituals, initiation ceremonies involving candles, oaths, and sometimes being whacked with symbolic tools. You revive this tradition, adding a dramatic chant and a new sacred hammer you totally made up. Your members eat it up. Everyone loves a bit of drama. Under your rule, the guild flourishes. More apprentices, more profits, more control. You don't just monitor trades, you regulate them. You create rules about how many shops can sell soap, what kind of dyes are guild approved, and even invent a colour scale to determine quality. Tier 2 indigo becomes a mark of excellence. And here's the debate. Did guilds help preserve quality and protect workers? Or did they strangle innovation and enforce monopolies? Scholars still argue. Some say guilds protected artisans from exploitation. Others say they were little more than closed-door cartels. You're leaning hard into cartel. You even launch your own brand. Guild Gold, a seal of excellence that's basically just your initials in a fancy font pressed into wax. Customers begin asking for it by name, but not everyone is thrilled. A few rebels form a free artisans league, a scrappy band of craftsmen who refuse to join the guild and undercut your prices. At first, you ignore them, then they start gaining traction. One of them opens a rival dye shop with bright red banners and a slightly better jingle than yours. So you go full medieval CEO. You stage a guild inspection, find their dyes to be improperly fermented, and have their inventory seized. You fine them, publicly, then buy their property at auction and turn it into a storage shed for your extra scrolls. But you keep one of them. Her name is Malis. She's smart, stubborn, and refuses to bow. You offer her a job running your operations in the next town over. She spits at your feet, so you double the offer. She accepts. You're not just crushing competition, you're absorbing it. At the next guild feast, a massive affair with roast boar, river trout, and an unhealthy amount of mead, you stand and toast the resurgence of proper trade under righteous management. Your members cheer. The bishop sends a note of approval. You've become the economy. Merchants check your guild seals before setting prices. Nobles consult you before hiring builders. Even the city guard asks you to help fix the barracks roof. At guild rates, of course. And you start thinking, what if you standardize everything? One currency, one trade language, one mark of quality, enforced by your guild. You'd be a one-person mint, court, and crown. And all it took was some flattery, fraud, and the occasional ritual involving a hammer and a goat-shaped cake. You leave the feast drunk on mead and power. The town's asleep, but your scrolls are awake, and in the flickering candlelight you draw up plans for your next move. Not just wealth, not just control, monopoly. Salt wind whips across your face as you stare at the sea, a grey churning expanse that smells like dead fish, wet ropes, and enormous, glittering profit. You've had enough of land-based hustle for now. Guilds, vineyards, toll roads, it's all fine and dandy, but the real money, it floats. Welcome to the maritime world of Venetian-style trade, where fortunes are built on cargo, contracts, and the occasional completely accidental brush with piracy. It starts with a single ship. You buy it at a dubious discount from a Genoese trader who insists it's sea-ready, while simultaneously refusing to sail on it himself. The hull leaks slightly. The sails look like they've lost a bar fight. The crew consists of 2 toothless old sailors, a boy named Fish, and a cook who smells like regret. Perfect. You rename it the Coin Flower. Paint on some fancy gold scroll work and call it a fast merchant cutter, even though it's really just a dressed-up fishing boat with ambition. Your first voyage? Wool to Bruges. Everyone wants English wool. It's basically medieval Bitcoin. You load the ship with your softest, whitest fleeces and bribe your way through customs, using a cask of your worst wine and a few handmade guild gold seals. And against all odds, it works. You make a 300% profit, which is the exact moment you get addicted to maritime trade. So, you go bigger, more ships, more crew, a better cook. You establish a trade route, Bruges for textiles, Bordeaux for wine, Venice for spices, and back again. You invest in saffron, silks, almonds, and, this is a weirdly big one, dried fish bladders used to clarify wine. Yeah, medieval people were strange. But here's the twist. Sea trade is high risk, high reward. For every profitable voyage, there's a chance of storms, pirates, or your crew accidentally selling half the cargo in the wrong port for the wrong coin. So you develop a system. You hire notaries to write detailed contracts, your first real step into the world of insurance. If your cargo sinks, you don't lose everything. If your captain mysteriously vanishes in port, along with the saffron, you're only half ruined. Historical fact: medieval merchants, especially in Italy, pioneered early forms of maritime insurance and joint investment ventures. These proto-banking tools allowed investors to share the risk of sea trade without getting their boots wet. Naturally, you lean in. You start selling shares in your voyages. A merchant invests 10 florins and gets 20% of the profit. You keep 60%, the ship gets the rest, and everyone's happy. Well, except the one investor who insists on accompanying the voyage and ends up seasick for 6 straight weeks. He sells his share to you mid-vomit, you double your cut. Bless him. And then Venice. Oh, Venice. You arrive in a city that floats like a jewel on the water, dripping in spices, silk, and raw, uncut capitalism. Here, everything has a price. Even prayers. You open a small office near the fish market. Nothing flashy. Just a room with 2 chairs, a lockbox, and a very polite scribe named Luca, who pretends not to notice how many conversations start with, "What if it just falls off the boat?" You meet traders from Byzantium, Egypt, the Holy Roman Empire. Deals fly like pigeons. You broker one shipment of Damascus steel and suddenly you're introduced to someone who smells like cinnamon and talks about direct routes to Alexandria, which is when someone offers you a pirate. Not metaphorically, literally. Captain Isabeau. Short, scowling. Smokes a pipe carved from human bone, probably. Her ship is called the Mercy's End and her cargo, unclaimed goods from enemy vessels. You strike a deal. She gets your cargo past Ottoman patrols. You give her safe docking. You buy her looted goods at a discount and resell them in polite company under the label Recovered Maritime Salvage. It's shady. It's genius. It's deeply profitable. Quirky fact: pirates and traders often worked hand in hand during the Middle Ages. The line between merchant and marauder was blurred, especially in port cities like Venice, where stolen goods often reappeared as part of legitimate trade. Soon, your network grows. You have captains you've never met ferrying goods between ports, couriers memorizing trade passwords, secret warehouses filled with silk and soapstone. You start trading in information, the most valuable cargo of all. You know when a Genoese convoy will dock. You know what cargo will flood the market and what's about to become scarce. You start hoarding nutmeg 2 months before the price triples. People begin asking you, not the church when Lent begins. And then comes the debate. Did medieval trade democratize wealth, or concentrate it in the hands of a few shipping dynasties? Historians split hairs over whether this period helped birth capitalism, or just created fancier ways to hoard stuff. You're busy naming your 5th ship the Prophet Wind, and learning how to say no refunds in 6 languages. But there's danger too. One ship goes missing. No wreck, no survivors. Just a floating crate of olive oil and a soaked flag with your crest. The merchant who funded that voyage starts getting nervous, as does the bishop you're currently sailing relics for. Yes, again. So you fake a pirate confession, hire an actor to pose as a captured raider, swearing the ship was looted and scuttled in the name of freedom from trade tyranny. You have him publicly hanged in Venice's plaza. Quietly, you send him and his family a crate of silver and tickets to Bruges. Problem solved. But now you know. The sea giveth, and the sea taketh your reputation in half a tide. So you diversify. Again, you start buying harbour rights. In every port where you trade, you pay for docks, you hire guards, you donate to local customs officials. You create the illusion of a legitimate, respectable shipping empire backed by coin, crosses, and cleverness. And back at your manor, far inland, you sit beneath a map stretching wall to wall, marked with red strings and gold pins, tracking goods, storms, alliances, and debts. You drink a goblet of your own wine, bite into a fig from a tree you technically don't own, and smile. You're no longer bound by roads. Your empire now floats, and the tide, for now, is on your side. There's something truly magical about profiting off of a war you're not even fighting in, especially when that war is wrapped in banners, blessings, and deeply questionable motives. Tonight, your next cash cow gallops straight from the Holy Land. That's right, you're getting rich off the Crusades. Now hold on, not as a knight. Please, you've seen enough muddy boots and corpse-filled fields for one lifetime. No, you're approaching this the only way you know how. Sideways, strategically, and dripping with plausible deniability. It starts with a Crusader parade. Flags fluttering, priests chanting, and a whole mess of armoured men strapping on swords and squinting into the sun like they actually understand where Jerusalem is on a map. You see the line of wagons following them filled with supplies, grain, wine, rope, extra horses, even jars of pickled eggs, and realise something instantly. They didn't pack enough. They never pack enough, which means you're about to sell them everything they forgot. At a markup so offensive it should come with its own excommunication. You open a Crusader outfitting shop at the city gate. You call it the Pilgrim's Purse. Your sign features a cartoon knight looking confused next to a barrel of salted pork. Within days, you're selling replacement tent stakes, fake relics for divine protection, and padded boots because, let's be honest, most of these guys will be limping before they cross the county line. One knight buys your sacred sandal of St. Jude and kisses it 3 times before strapping it to his horse. You made it from an old monk's slipper and a dog collar. Then come the logistics contracts. You offer to store valuables for departing crusaders, coins, heirlooms, land deeds, all very official, all sealed with wax and prayer. Half of these men won't make it back, and you know it. You charge guarding fees and maintenance dues, and after a certain point, say 5 years, you just sort of inherit the unclaimed goods. That's how you end up with 3 manors, a jewelled goblet shaped like a lion's head, and a collection of foreign coins you have to pretend to know the value of. Historical fact: during the Crusades, many departing nobles entrusted their property to the church or local officials while they were away. When they died, as they often did, that property sometimes became permanently absorbed into the Guardian's holdings. A legal process? Technically a windfall? Definitely. But you're not just looting the dead, you're exploiting the living. You notice that some crusaders, particularly the ones from out of town, don't actually know what the Holy Land looks like, or how long it'll take to get there. So, you create maps. Beautiful, intricate, completely fictional maps. You draw in mountains where there are none, mystical cities filled with gold, and rivers that conveniently pass by taverns you own. You sell the maps for a tidy price. Call them pilgrim's guides. They sell out. Then comes the recruitment market. A local baron wants to send a few men but doesn't want to empty his castle. You offer him an alternative. Pay you, and you will supply his crusaders. You round up a bunch of street thieves, former mercenaries, and debtors you're already holding IOUs on. You scrub them down, slap crosses on their tunics, and send them off. They make it as far as the coast before vanishing with their travel funds. No refunds, of course. You're building a reputation now. People whisper that you're the man who can get you to the Holy Land, or at least make you look like you tried. Nobles buy relics from you to claim their spiritual credit. You create fake indulgences, written in flowery Latin and sealed with wax made from pig fat and crushed berries. The Archbishop buys one. Quirky fact: some medieval merchants sold get-out-of-purgatory letters, basically spiritual hall passes. Not officially sanctioned, but if it had a seal and looked impressive, people believed it. You even start bundling yours with Crusader starter packs. But then, of course, things escalate. You're contacted by a group of disgruntled knights. They don't want to go to war, but they do want the perks. Noble reputation, church forgiveness, that whole all your sins are wiped clean deal. You create a service, Proxy Crusaders. For a fee, you send someone else to war in your name. If they die, you still get the spiritual credit. It's like medieval identity theft, but blessed. One guy sends his cousin, another sends his cook. You hear of a monk who sent a goose. The church investigates. You forge a papal exemption. It holds, just barely. Here comes the debate. Were the Crusades genuinely about piety, or just profit and politics dressed up in holy robes? Historians still fight over it. For every story of sincere faith, there's a tale of looting, land grabbing, and backroom deals. You are, without question, Exhibit A for the latter. Then one evening something changes. A crusader returns. Not dead, not broke, rich. He arrives with camels, actual camels, jewellery from Damascus, and a sword that hums when swung. You invite him for dinner. He tells you about trade route spices, eastern silk that shimmers in candlelight, and your mind races. Maybe it's time you go east, not as a knight. Please. You still have soft hands and a healthy respect for arrows, but maybe, as a trader, you'd need ships, guides, bribes, an excuse. Maybe a holy mission to recover relics? You start sketching ideas by candlelight, sipping wine mixed with cinnamon, imported of course. There's always another frontier, always another holy war. and as long as someone's dying for salvation, you'll be right behind them. Selling sandals and writing receipts, your fingers are stained with ink, your eyes ache from candlelight, and your scribe keeps falling asleep mid-sentence, head bobbing like a chicken in prayer. Why? Because tonight you're not slashing prices or loading ships. You're forging the most profitable weapon in the medieval world. Paperwork. Welcome to the world of medieval land snatching by law and quill. It starts with a scroll. Well, more like a stack of them. You're reviewing old land deeds one afternoon. Contracts you've inherited from your Crusader storage program. R.I.P. Lord Ethelric. When you notice something strange, a particular clause, tucked away in the fine, faded Latin. It basically says that if no male heir is found within 7 years, the land reverts to the guardian. And guess who just so happens to be the guardian? Exactly. Now, to be clear, you didn't write this clause. Not this time. But it gets you thinking. Why not encourage a few more legal clarifications? You hire a team of scribes. Not monks, those guys are too honest. You want the scrappy kind, the ones who sharpen quills like daggers and drink ink when they run out of ale. You pay them well. You build a room just for them, lined with scrolls, ink pots, and one very bored-looking goat named Hugo, who eats the evidence when necessary. Together you begin editing history. Just a few adjustments here and there, moving boundary lines, retranslating Latin clauses, restoring old signatures that may or may not have ever existed. You don't forge new deeds, too risky, you improve old ones. Soon you're claiming land that technically, legally, spiritually might have been yours all along. No one can prove it wasn't, and by the time they try, the property has changed hands 3 times, and you've sold it to a bishop's cousin who doesn't even live in the country. Here's your historical fact. In the medieval period, most land records were handwritten, unstandardized, and often kept in personal chests, not central registries, that made them ripe for manipulation, especially during times of war, plague, or general chaos. Lost records were the excuse of the century. You become known as a land consultant. People come to you when they want to rediscover their family estate. You charge a fee, draft up a new ancestral lineage, and throw in a nice family crest if they pay extra. Then you hit the jackpot. A minor noble, Baron Edric, dies without heirs. His land is vast, lucrative, and suddenly everyone wants a piece of it, including you. You forge a will. It's simple, elegant, written in just enough flourished Latin to look authentic and just messy enough to seem old. It names a long-lost cousin as the rightful heir. You are that cousin. Well, technically, you're the representative of that cousin, who unfortunately died en route to claim his inheritance. You have a broken locket, a forged birth record, and a very emotional monologue prepared for when the steward gets suspicious. It works. You now own the Baron's entire estate, including several sheep farms, a river mill, and a creepy tower that you swear breathes at night. You start to systematize land acquisition. You send agents to find abandoned or disputed properties. You train scribes to specialize in different handwriting styles. You even host a seminar. Introduction to Legal Memory. How to convince people their grandfather promised you that orchard. And it gets weirder. You begin predicting which properties will become vulnerable, watching for heirs about to die in battle, nobles in debt, monasteries losing favour. You prepare the documents before they're even needed. It's like gambling, but with scrolls and dramatically timed funerals. Quirky fact, there were actual cases in which forgeries became so widely accepted they were eventually treated as authentic. Some churches used donated land deeds that were completely fake, but because no one challenged them for generations, they stood as legal proof. You call this historic squatting, but you're not without enemies. A young steward named Ulrich starts sniffing around, claims some of your paperwork feels too perfect. He finds discrepancies, wrong dates, incorrect saints referenced, an estate name that accidentally references a town that didn't exist until 50 years later. Rookie mistake. So, you discredit him. You forge a letter written by Ulrich to a rival noble, promising to sell secrets in exchange for a hunting lodge and a red-haired mistress. The letter makes its way into the hands of the bishop's court. Ulrich is banished within a week. You send him a goat named Hugo as a farewell gift. Debate time. Some scholars argue that forged documents weren't always malicious. They were sometimes seen as correcting history, or filling in the gaps. Others say forgers were the sharks of the Middle Ages, preying on a system too fragile to protect itself. You say they were just ahead of their time, At this point, your portfolio includes castles, vineyards, toll roads, trade rights, and something called the perpetual right to harvest from the Elder Woods, which you're pretty sure is just a really dramatic way of saying you can pick berries. You build a records vault, temperature controlled by accident due to the poor ventilation and one mouldy wall. You hire a blind scribe to recopy your most sensitive forgeries. He can't read what he's writing, but his penmanship is perfect. At a feast, someone jokes that you've rewritten half the kingdom. You raise your goblet and don't correct them. Because the truth is, land doesn't belong to the brave or the strong or the divine. It belongs to the clever, to the quill, to the person who writes history first and best. You sleep well that night, beneath a roof you technically never bought, surrounded by papers that say it all belongs to you. And in the flickering light of your study, Hugo chews on a rejected deed while you plot your next acquisition. There's a widow with a disputed border, a monastery with fading ink on its founding charter, a noble heir who's too drunk to remember his own name. You smell opportunity, and it smells like wax ink and the faintest whiff of goat. The fire flickers low, the air is thick with a sharp metallic scent of mercury and crushed herbs. Bottles clink on wooden shelves, some glowing faintly green, others sealed with wax and ominous symbols. You're no longer a merchant, no longer a land grabber, not even a war profiteer. Tonight, you are something greater. You are an alchemist, or at least you're pretending to be one, because in this golden little pocket of the Middle Ages, there is no faster way to convince rich, anxious people to give you everything they own than to suggest, with an appropriately serious face, that you might be this close to turning lead into gold. And let's be honest, no one's fact-checking you. It all starts with a rumour. Some noble in France claims his court alchemist produced a small nugget of transmuted gold. Word travels fast, as it tends to when the subject is unlimited wealth through weird science. Suddenly, every king, bishop and desperate merchant wants their very own philosopher in residence. And you're already good at lying with paper. Now you just need to learn to lie with glass, fire and very expensive Latin. You transform your study into a laboratory. You install an alembic, it looks impressive. Hang a chart of the 7 planetary metals, Saturn equals lead, Sun equals gold, etc., and wear a robe that looks vaguely arcane. You add a big book titled Secretum Secretorum, it's mostly empty. You pretend it's encrypted. Then you invite your first client, a wealthy merchant, overworked, superstitious, sweating with greed. He asks if you've truly found a way to make gold. You frown, stroke your chin, whisper, "Not yet, but the mercury sings to me." He gasps, pays you 50 silver just to continue the work. Boom, you're in. Historical fact. Alchemy was both an early form of chemistry and a deeply mystical practice. It aimed not only to turn base metals into gold, the famous great work, but to discover the elixir of life, cure diseases, and uncover divine truth through transformation. Some alchemists were respected scholars, others, straight-up frauds in nice hats. You're aiming for somewhere in the middle. You keep the act going, you buy lead in bulk, you mix it with vinegar, copper filings and powdered eggshell. You chant over it, burn it, cry a little. Nothing happens, but you tell your client the transformation is beginning at the metaphysical level. He pays again. You start hosting alchemy demonstrations, controlled chaos behind closed doors. You heat mercury in a sealed crucible, toss in some real silver, and at the right moment, drop a single golden coin into the mix when no one's looking. The crowd gasps. You bow, say nothing. The news spreads. You've seen gold form before your very eyes. You don't confirm it, but you also don't deny it. Then comes your first noble patron, Lady Isabel, a countess, sharp as her jewellery but hopeful in that dangerous, desperate way. She funds your work, sets you up in a private tower, sends you scholars, assistants, and an herbalist who's either a spy or just really into mushrooms. You're now officially a court alchemist, and you make it weird. You fill your lab with symbols, stars, moons, gold dragons. You invent a ritual that involves humming, clockwise walking, and controlling the elements. It's absolute nonsense. But when you give Lady Isabel a red powder that makes steel sizzle, she declares you a man of the stars. It was just saltpeter and crushed beetles. But hey, quirky fact. Some real alchemists claim to have created the legendary Philosopher's Stone, a substance that could turn anything into gold and grant immortality. The most famous hoax was by a man named Edward Kelly, who faked results to impress nobles, lived in luxury, and eventually fell from a window under suspicious circumstances. You make a note to avoid windows, but there's risk. Always is. You're running a long con. The longer it goes, the deeper the hole, and your clients are getting impatient. Lady Isabel wants results. A bishop offers to buy a sample of your philosopher's stone. You tell him the stone must not be touched by hands impure with greed. He nods solemnly and sends you more gold. Then, disaster. A rival alchemist arrives in town. Brother Gervais, bald, pious, smells like sulphur and smugness. He claims you are a fraud and that he has achieved a real transmutation. You attend his demonstration. He drops something into a crucible. Fire, smoke, a sparkle of gold. The crowd erupts. You investigate. It's fake. He's using fool's gold, iron pyrite and sleight of hand. Brilliant. So you do what any enterprising alchemist would. You steal his method, improve it, and accuse him of copying you. The crowd believes you. He disappears, maybe into a monastery, maybe into a barrel. Either way, your status rises. Debate time. Was alchemy ever a legitimate science? Some scholars argue it was the forerunner of chemistry, rich with discoveries hidden inside its mysticism. Others say it was spiritual theatre, a desperate dance between fraud and faith. Most likely, both. You now hold a strange power. You aren't just wealthy, you're mysterious, dangerous. People whisper that you hold secrets not meant for mortal minds, that you speak with angels, that your blood is tinted with mercury. You don't correct them. You start bottling essence of gold, cinnamon oil and crushed marigold. You sell dragon salt, table salt with red clay. You invent a new symbol for inner lead and draw it on everything. Your lab becomes part clinic, part temple, part madman's playhouse. And at the centre of it all is you, sipping wine, reading made-up formulas, and occasionally actually discovering something useful, like that silver dissolves in acid, or that honey masks the taste of most poisons. You write it all down in your masterwork, Deorum Obscurum of the Dark Gold. It's a mixture of real notes, fake revelations, and 2 entire chapters written in a made-up alphabet. A collector offers 500 florins for the only copy. You refuse. He offers 1,000. You make 2 copies. The next morning, as your lab glows softly with the light of a slow-burning crucible, you realise you don't need to make gold. You already did. It just happens to be wearing a robe and a very convincing accent. You've lied about land, gold, and your ability to rewrite the laws of nature, but tonight you're selling bones. No, not your own. Although, let's be honest, if someone offered the right price, you'd probably part with a femur or 2. No, this is the realm of holy relics, shards of saints, scraps of robes, and suspiciously well-preserved fingers that allegedly pointed at the heavens and or smacked a demon in the face. Relics are the new gold standard, sacred, sought after, and in your hands shockingly profitable. You ease into this racket the way you do everything else, with quiet audacity. It begins when a small monastery outside of York sends a letter to one of your vineyards. Apparently they're looking to enhance their relic collection in order to draw more pilgrims. Their current centerpiece is the hair of St. Mildred. Spoiler, it's a goose feather stuck to candle wax. You smell blood in the water, and by blood we mean a financial opportunity wrapped in incense. So you reply with a generous offer, a fragment of the true cross. Yes, that one, freshly discovered by your cousin during a pilgrimage to Constantinople. Your cousin was actually just a guy named Perkin, who once got seasick in a puddle, but we're not here to quibble. You wrap a nice splinter from an old wine barrel in velvet, place it in a custom-carved reliquary, and add a forged certificate bearing the seal of an obscure bishop who died 50 years ago, and therefore cannot argue. They pay handsomely, and just like that you're in the relic flipping business. Historical fact. Relic trade was big money. Churches and monasteries used relics to attract pilgrims, which meant donations, offerings, and economic booms for the surrounding areas. Whether the relics were real was secondary. There were so many authentic pieces of the true cross floating around that, by one monk's count, you could build an entire ark with them. You lean hard into the absurdity. Finger bones of apostles, a sandal strap from St. Joseph, the whisper of St. Cecilia, captured in a glass vial. Yes, really. You invent a team of travelling holy seekers who report back with sacred finds. They are in reality your wine delivery boys with new tunics and a flair for storytelling. You start a catalogue, Reliquiae Rarae, complete with sketched illustrations and glowing testimonials from monks who definitely did not write those things. Ever since we acquired the molar of St. Crispin, Our boot sales have tripled. Brother Ethelbert, Shoemaker's Abbey. Your biggest hit? A skull fragment labelled St. Longinus the Mild. There was no such saint. You made him up while drinking spiced ale and watching a chicken peck a skull in your courtyard. But the name stuck, the relic sold. And now there are 3 different abbeys claiming to house different parts of his skeleton. You don't correct them. Then comes your masterpiece. You acquire an actual body. Legally? Unclear. It was buried in a small plot outside a monastery that recently relocated. You dig it up under cover of fog, clean the bones, and craft a narrative so airtight it could survive Inquisition scrutiny. St. Ermin of the Hollow Oak. His story. A hermit who spoke only to birds, healed lepers with moss, and once survived for 40 days on nothing but dew. You create a beautifully illuminated life story commission, a wooden reliquary shaped like a tree stump. Place 1 femur in a travelling shrine and break the rest into fragments of holy bone, each accompanied by a tear-stained scroll of dubious origin. The relics sell out before you finish printing the 2nd edition of his story. But of course, success breeds scrutiny. A friar named Theobald starts investigating. He shows up at one of your sales tents, sniffs the air and says, "This bone smells like pork." You respond by offering him a discount on St. Ermin's sacred toenail. He doesn't laugh. So you plant a divine sign. A wax statue of Ermin weeps during morning mass. You arrange it with a hollow head, melted candle wax, and a string operated by a choir boy paid in honey cakes. It makes the local chronicles. Theobald gets reassigned. You throw a feast. Quirky fact. Some relics were so ridiculous that even medieval people laughed. There was once a monastery that claimed to have the breath of the Virgin Mary, kept in a sealed jar. Another claimed to have a feather from the Archangel Gabriel's wing. You begin collecting these stories and repackaging them as satirical relics for very rich patrons who enjoy ironic piety. You build a network of relic brokers. They travel across Europe buying questionable bones, tattered robes, rusty nails, and smooth pebbles to be sold as miracle stones from the River Jordan. You don't even verify anything anymore. You just brand it, box it, bless it, and let the tithe rolls handle the rest. And here's your debate. Did people truly believe in these relics, or was it all theatre? Some historians say the faithful clung to them out of desperation and spiritual hunger. Others argue they knew the game but played along because hope, however fragile, was better than nothing. You think about that as you polish a shard of pottery and label it Blessed Pot of St. Lawrence, pre-roast. Because here's the truth, belief is an economy. It's bought, sold, performed, and, when necessary, faked with incredible style. At a grand cathedral fair you sell a reliquary shaped like a lion that opens to reveal a sliver of Daniel's tooth. A child gasps. A bishop buys it for twice the asking price. You wink at the altar boy and toss him a coin. You head home with a wagon of empty crates and a pouch full of coins that jingle like a chorus of tiny hallelujahs. You're not just rich, you're divinely profitable. And somewhere in the hills, under a full moon, a chicken pecks at another skull and you wonder, St. Longinus the Mild, should you bring him back for a sequel? It starts with a laugh. Not yours, of course. You're far too busy counting coins and trying to decide whether that new velvet doublet makes you look eccentric or one bad sermon away from heresy. No, the laugh belongs to a jester, a real one. Bells on the hat, patchwork motley, a lute he doesn't actually know how to play. He's juggling pears and reciting a limerick about a monk who fell in love with a goose. The court is howling. And you? You're watching from the corner, sipping diluted wine and noticing something no one else sees. The jester is listening. Not just to the laughter, to the whispers. He's watching nobles argue behind fans, catch each other's eyes during songs, slip notes under plates when the roast swan arrives. While everyone thinks he's a fool, he's mapping the battlefield. You recognise the move immediately, because you used to do it too. And that's when it hits you. There's a whole world of power, ripe for the plucking, hiding in the space between the throne and the wine jug. You just need a seat at the table, or rather under it. So what do? You become a jester. Well, not you personally. You're far too refined for tights and pratfalls. But you sponsor one, train one, weaponize one. You find a quick-witted boy from a village you technically own. Teach him wordplay, music, mimicry. Give him a colourful costume, a handful of riddles, and a secret mission. Laugh with them. Laugh at them. But mostly listen. You name him Pip. He names himself Pip the Perilous. You let it slide. You plant him in the court of a minor noble, Baron Aldred, notorious for his temper and his extremely valuable trade licenses. Pip becomes a favourite instantly. He juggles eggs while reciting bad poetry, plays the lute with his toes, makes off-colour jokes about abbots that everyone laughs at and then immediately denies laughing at. And all the while he gathers secrets. Who's in debt, who's cheating on whom, who's plotting rebellion, and who just wants another goblet of mead. Every week Pip writes to you in code, jests with hidden meanings. You pay his salary, send him gifts, and sometimes slip him real information to pass along. He becomes your whisper pipeline. And then you start using it. When Baron Aldred considers raising tolls, Pip delivers a skit mocking corrupt tax collectors, starring a goose named His Grace. The Baron laughs so hard he cancels the hike. When two rival lords begin quarrelling over a shared border, Pip stages a parody duel between two puppets who stab each other over a hill that's not even that nice. The nobles laugh. The feud cools. You're not just controlling trade routes now, you're controlling moods. Historical fact. Court jesters held more influence than people realise. Because they were fools, they were allowed to speak truths others couldn't, often becoming informal advisors. Some wielded considerable behind-the-scenes power, shaping decisions through satire and suggestion. You expand the idea, create a network of jesters, minstrels, mummers, and wandering storytellers. You train them in subtext, performance, and observation. You call it the laughing circle. To everyone else, they're just travelling fools. To you, they're intel agents with better shoes. Quirky fact. In some medieval courts, jesters were the only people who could openly mock royalty without being executed. They could say things like, "The king is wise as a wet turnip," and somehow walk away alive. You start including wet turnip in all your satire scripts just to test the limits. Then comes the big score, the Duke of Thalenmere. Old, paranoid, rich enough to build a castle shaped like a boar. He's known for jailing advisors, poisoning rivals, and executing jesters who can't juggle while blindfolded. Naturally, you send him your best man, Pip. He lasts 2 days before writing back. He has gout, 3 mistresses, a failing mint, and no idea his guards are selling his wine. Also, he sleeps with a piglet. Unclear if symbolic. You nearly choke on your stew, and then opportunity. The Duke, desperate for a male heir, is planning to secretly marry a merchant's daughter. This would outrage the nobles, but he trusts Pip. So Pip suggests a quiet wedding, in a neutral location, managed by a trustworthy third party. Guess who gets the contract? You. You handle everything. Discreet venue, forged documents, 2 monks who'll say anything for the right coin. The wedding goes off without a hitch. You now have a duchess who owes you her entire social elevation, and a duke who believes you saved his political skin. All thanks to a man in a jingly hat. But here's the debate. Were jesters subversive truth-tellers who challenged power, or were they just tools of the elite used to reinforce control through mockery? Historians split on this. Some say they were proto-satirists, others say they were safety valves, paid laughter to release the steam of public resentment. You say they're incredibly useful. Your jesters now operate across 5 courts and 2 royal households. They perform songs that subtly promote your trade routes, tell stories that make your rivals seem foolish, spread rumours disguised as entertainment. One ballad about a count who sells his titles for cheese becomes so popular that the real count has to move to another region and change his banner. You laugh, quietly, then hire the bard who wrote it. Now at every noble feast, at every tournament and council, there's someone making jokes, and the jokes always come back to you. Your rivals are confused, your allies are entertained, and your enemies, well, they're becoming punchlines. As the sun sets over your latest estate, a gift from a bishop who laughed too hard at Pip's skit about papal indulgences, you sit on your terrace, wine in hand, and listen to a jester tune his lute. He strums a note, clears his throat, and begins, "There once was a man who made kings laugh." You raise your glass, you love it already. The candlelight dances across the wall, illuminating a stolen icon, small, gold-framed, eyes too large, staring eternally at nothing. It came from a monastery in the mountains, liberated during a particularly chaotic pilgrimage. Now it hangs in your study like a trophy from a very pious heist. You sip wine, stare back at the icon and wonder, not, is this morally questionable, but, how much can I get for it? Because tonight you're not a merchant, not a monk, not even a mild-mannered miracle salesman. Tonight you're an underground art dealer. It's a quiet business. No fanfare, no fairs, no banners proclaiming holy relics and masterpieces, Buy one, get one blasphemy free. This is high-end, whisper-only trade. Sacred art, stolen scrolls, gilded miniatures, statues chipped just right to prove they're ancient. You're dealing in cultural capital, back when that meant things people will pay absurd amounts for while pretending they're being devout. And it starts, like most profitable sins, with a monk. Brother Tommaso, lovely singing voice, very loose morals. He approaches you in secret with a donation from his abbey's treasury, a carved ivory Madonna missing one hand and 3 centuries of documented ownership. Where did you get this, you ask? He just shrugs. God works in mysterious ways. You give him 50 silver. He gives you a blessing and a spare relic. St. Andrew's foot. Might be a chicken bone, you don't ask. You sell the statue to a minor count who places it on his private altar, lights a candle, and swears his gout improves within a week. Boom, you're hooked. Historical fact. Religious art in the Middle Ages wasn't just decoration, it was power. Icons, statues, and illuminated manuscripts carried spiritual and social weight. Nobles, churches, and monarchs vied for the finest pieces, often raiding rival territories or paying absurd sums for authentic holy objects. You start assembling a team. One scribe skilled in copying illuminated manuscripts and making aged parchment by rubbing it with ash and chicken fat. One sculptor who specializes in making restorations that are technically entirely new. And one nun, Sister Elodia, who knows which abbeys are storing gold-leafed books in mouldy cellars and how to borrow them without alerting anyone but St. Peter. Together you become the shadow behind sacred art. You build a catalogue, of course. Nothing printed. Too dangerous. Just an illustrated ledger of what's available, who might want it, and how many coins you can squeeze from them before they pretend to be outraged. You offer services, relic authentication. Yes, this finger is definitely St. Cuthbert's. See the holy curve? Icon repair. That crack isn't damage, it's divine tension. Discreet delivery. You train a mule named Bartholomew who can carry up to 3 statues and has no problem sleeping in chapels. Soon, the buyers come to you. A duchess who wants a gift for her chapel. A bishop trying to outshine a rival. A merchant who wants to hang a triptych above his fireplace just in case God is watching. They don't ask where the pieces come from. You don't tell. Then comes the real score. A monastery in Burgundy. Old, wealthy, badly defended. A fire damages one wing. In the chaos, Sister Elodia rescues a collection of Byzantine icons hidden behind a false wall. You receive the shipment 3 weeks later in hay-stuffed barrels marked dried fish. Inside, gold, enamel, paintings so luminous they look wet, saints with halos the size of dinner plates. You cry a little, then immediately call a buyer, a Florentine banker, rich, blind in one eye, known for 2 things, his love of rare art and his tendency to pay in rubies. He arrives, examines each piece with a magnifying glass and a disturbingly intimate whisper. At the end, he places a velvet pouch on your desk and says, "No one else could have acquired these." You nod humbly, pretending you didn't just profit from divine looting. Quirky fact, there were actual medieval art smugglers, and some monasteries were known to quietly sell off pieces to pay debts. During times of upheaval, plague, war, schisms, sacred art moved around like loot in a dice game. You've just made yourself the one holding the dice. But success brings risk. Your name begins to surface in hushed tones. The man with the moving icons, the collector's collector, St. Prophetus. Church officials begin sniffing around. One cardinal sends a letter demanding to examine your chapel inventory. You respond by faking a fire, losing half your collection in the blaze and sending him a soot-streaked Virgin Mary as an apology. He weeps when he sees it, believes it's a sign. You get invited to his private villa. Your art ring grows. You create limited series, sets of holy images designed to be collected. Wealthy patrons compete for the full set. You number them, add small imperfections, call them divine additions. Collectors now say things like, "I have the second St. Florian, but not the weeping one." They send bribes, you send copies. It's like spiritual Pokemon and you're printing the cards. Debate time. Was the movement of sacred art a cultural crime or a necessary adaptation to chaos? Some argue these items were stolen heritage. Others claim they were preserved, spread, and appreciated more broadly. You argue that whoever has the icon owns the power, and right now you're glowing with it. One evening you receive a sealed invitation. The Pope's archivist has heard of your taste. He wants to meet. Discreetly, possibly in disguise. You smile, because once the Vatican starts shopping, you're not just trading in sacred art. You're trading in spiritual influence. You pour yourself a goblet of wine, pat Bartholomew the mule on the head, and prepare your next shipment. An 8-inch tall St. Sebastian whose expression suggests he knows exactly how expensive he is. And somewhere in a dark chapel, someone lights a candle in front of your latest forgery and whispers a prayer. You don't know if God's listening, but you are. And you charge by the whisper. The music is soft, the perfume is strong, and the money? Oh, the money is everywhere. It's tucked in silken pouches, slipped under pillows, stuffed into boots, folded into discreet letters with wax seals that break under candlelight. You're not in the court, the marketplace, or even the church tonight. You're in the most lucrative, discreet, and carefully curated establishment in the entire city. You're in your brothel, and you are the brothel baron, or baroness. We don't judge. In this business, titles are flexible, so are morals, but profits, rigid and reliable. It starts innocently enough, if anything about this story can still be called innocent. You inherit a rundown house in the rougher part of town, cracked shutters, creaking floors, suspicious stains no amount of vinegar can remove. It comes with a deed and a note from a distant cousin who went east for spiritual reasons. You know that's code for fleeing tax debt, but hey, free building. The previous owner ran an entertainment house, badly, but the location, perfect. Right on the edge of the merchant quarter, within walking distance of the church, the Guildhall and the Royal Barracks. Foot traffic, lonely men, loose morals. You see the gold before you see the dust. So you clean it up. You hire a carpenter, a painter, and a woman named Marga, who looks like she could shatter a barrel with one hand and has a laugh that makes soldiers weep. She becomes your madam, and your first and best investment. You don't just open a brothel, you create a brand. You call it the Velvet Lantern. You don't advertise with words, just a symbol carved into a sign out front. A candle, glowing faintly red, discreet, curious, impossible to forget. And it works. Historical fact. Brothels were a thriving part of medieval urban life, especially in cities with large transient populations, traders, mercenaries, pilgrims. Some were licensed by the church, yes, really, while others operated in the grey space between tolerated sin and forbidden pleasure. You go the licensed route, not because you care about laws, but because a little paperwork means fewer raids and more leverage. You pay the town bailiff in silver and favours. You send the bishop's nephew home with a smile and a limp. And suddenly, the Velvet Lantern becomes untouchable. You're not just selling flesh, you're selling fantasy, power, safety, secrets. And oh, the secrets. Your rooms have thin walls. Your girls and boys are trained not just in charm, but in listening. Names, plans, jealousies, confessions whispered between kisses. You hear of affairs, inheritances, political schemes. Once, a noble blurts out the entire troop movement plan for an upcoming campaign mid-embrace. You send a polite, anonymous note to his rival. They send back coin. You don't just run a brothel. You run espionage in silk, and you expand. Add themed rooms, a monastic chamber for the piously deviant, a merchant's dream filled with exotic drapery, a room with mirrors, a room with ropes, a room with nothing but pillows and 3 musicians who play softly in the corner and pretend not to exist. Weird? Yes. Profitable? Astoundingly. And here comes your quirky fact. In some medieval cities, brothels were required to operate outside city walls, but close enough to be accessible. You buy up a few buildings on the edge of the wall and convert them into guest houses. People know what they are, they still knock. But of course, morality must be maintained, publicly. So you fund a chapel, yes, a real one. Small, tasteful, painted by your favourite art forger. You call it the Sanctuary of Reflection. You donate part of your profits every week. The priest occasionally shows up drunk and no one cares. It buys you legitimacy. And now for the debate. Were brothels empowering spaces for the workers who ran them, or just another layer of exploitation? Scholars argue both sides. Some brothel keepers gave their workers protection, autonomy, even shares of profits. Others, well, didn't. You? You run a tight, safe ship. Your employees get paid well, dressed well, protected by 2 guards and 1 very overqualified apothecary who once worked in your alchemy lab and now brews aphrodisiacs, hangover cures, and something called velvet bliss that makes people see colours when they sneeze. But the real power isn't in the pleasure, it's in the leverage. You start offering discreet guest logs to important clients, coded journals they can use to record their visits. You keep copies, you promise they'll never be shared. Unless, of course, something unfortunate happens to your business. Suddenly your enemies become patrons. You own judges, guild leaders, 2 bishops, half the royal council. You don't even need to threaten anymore. You just smile, you add a second location, then a third, one near the port, one on the road to the next city, one floating brothel, disguised as a wine barge that sails once a week and always returns with a full purse and no questions asked. One day, a noblewoman visits. She doesn't come for company, she comes for partnership. Turns out she's been funding a society of discreet indulgence among the upper echelons of court. Secret parties, masks, chants, the works. She wants you in. You invite her upstairs. By morning, you've merged empires. Together you begin planning the Crimson Ball, a once-a-year masquerade where everything's for sale, and no name is ever spoken aloud. Invitations are hand-delivered. Attendance is whispered about in scandalized tones. And you sit above it all, watching, smiling, profiting. You've turned desire into coin, secrets into currency. And your empire, once built on vineyards and tolls and forged documents, now thrives on the most ancient economy of all, need. As dawn breaks over the city, you walk through the quiet halls of the Velvet Lantern, past rooms where dreams were bought and sold, and you realize you don't need a crown. You already have a kingdom, and everyone pays tribute, eventually. The press groans like an old mule as you crank the handle, watching thick black ink seep into paper with a kind of oily satisfaction. The letters are crisp, the edges are sharp. The words are dangerous. You're not stamping indulgence forms or royal proclamations tonight. You're printing ideas and making coin on every single one. Welcome to the age of ink, influence, and unregulated messaging. Tonight you become a printing power broker. Now let's get something clear. You're not a revolutionary. Not yet. You're not exactly trying to overthrow kings or upset the Pope's breakfast. But you have noticed that people believe what they read, especially when it's printed in dramatic fonts and passed around by sweaty men in market squares. So when a dusty traveller from Mainz stumbles into your tavern with ink-stained fingers and a box of metal letters, you buy him 3 drinks, listen to his rambling pitch about movable type, and then, very quietly, buy the press out from under him when he can't pay his tab. You name it the scriptorium. It's a humble beginning, a creaky machine, a cramped room, 2 apprentices who think punctuation is a type of plague. But the moment you print your first pamphlet, the entire game changes. The title, 7 Signs the Plague is Caused by Your Neighbour's Goat. It sells out by noon. You're officially in business. Historical fact. The printing press hit Europe in the 15th century like a cultural wildfire. Gutenberg's invention revolutionized communication, breaking the church and the nobility's monopoly on knowledge books, pamphlets, posters. They spread faster than the plague and often with worse consequences. You get creative. Start printing news scrolls, short reports of wars, scandals, and fabricated celebrity gossip. Count Theobald caught wearing silk stockings. Is he even a man? You release anonymous sermons mocking corrupt bishops, political satire disguised as riddles, recipes that promise to cure melancholy and increase one's chances of inheriting land. But the real money? Custom prints. You offer private commissions for nobles, merchants, and aspiring cult leaders. Want a family history that says you're descended from Charlemagne? Done need 1,000 wedding invitations with gold leaf and a completely fake Latin blessing? Absolutely. Looking to post an open letter denouncing your cousin's bakery as infested with demons? For the right price, you'll even add illustrations. You become a reputation manager, a narrative shaper, a myth crafter. You are, in essence, a one-person media empire. Then you start printing books, not the kind with covers and serious monks leaning over candlelit desks. No, you go for the cheap, dirty, thrilling stuff. Poetry collections that read like mildly scandalous tavern songs, illustrated tales of saints who fought sin with passion, even a serial adventure story called The Ballad of Thornblade, starring a fictional rogue who suspiciously resembles you in your younger days. People start quoting you at parties, and not always ironically, but with power comes scrutiny. A church official shows up with a scroll of concerns. Your prints are irreverent, inflammatory, possibly heretical. You nod. Offer him a limited edition prayer book bound in lambskin with a flattering dedication to his bishop. He leaves smiling. You print 3 more editions and sell them to his rivals. Quirky fact: in the real world, early printed books were sometimes disguised as handwritten manuscripts so they wouldn't offend traditionalists. Some included fake scribe errors just to look authentic. You take it a step further and release a scroll full of intentional typos called the Book of Holy Misprints. It becomes a collector's item. Then, inevitably, it gets political. A noble war brews in the north. You're approached by both sides to print propaganda, each asking for pamphlets declaring the other an insult to God and decency. You take both jobs, same font, different ink colour, double the profit. But here comes the debate. Did printing liberate medieval minds or just spread louder nonsense? Some scholars argue that literacy and free expression flourished. Others say the press enabled lies, mass hysteria, and ego inflation at industrial scale. You say, yes, and it's great for business. You train new apprentices, some who can read, some who just know how to line up type without accidentally spelling blessings as blisters. You open a second shop, then a third. You create a secret imprint, the Quill of Night, for your more aggressive publications. One noble is publicly embarrassed after you print a ballad accusing him of wooing his cousin's pig. You receive a crate of gold and a polite request to never print again. You use the gold to launch a poetry contest. Winner gets published. Loser gets sold as folk comedy under a fake name. You start collecting your best pieces in an annual volume called the Book of Truths and Slight Exaggerations. It includes political cartoons, gossip, medicinal advice, and a weekly Who's Dead section for local clergy. It becomes a bestseller. You attend a dinner party where someone quotes a line from your goat plague pamphlet as a moral lesson. You smile, nod, and pour more wine. You've made yourself the voice of the people, or at least the people who can afford 6 coppers and the attention span to read one side of a pamphlet before throwing it at a chicken. And then, the king notices, a courier arrives with a sealed note. You're invited to court, not for punishment, not for trial, but for a private commission. The king wants a history written, his history, revised, polished, made suitable for future generations and possibly a few flattering statues. You get paid in land, you get access to court records, you get control over the narrative. Because here's the truth, one that bleeds through every page, every scroll, every limited print sermon. Whoever controls the ink controls the story, and whoever controls the story controls the future. There's a soft tap at your chamber door, barely audible over the crackle of the hearth and the gentle scratch of your quill. You glance up from your latest commission, a flattering and completely fictional account of the king's great-grandfather slaying a dragon with nothing but his wit and a loaf of rye. The door creaks open. It's a servant, not yours, which is always a red flag. He bows low and says, His Majesty requests your presence. You don't groan aloud, but you think it. Because once the king starts requesting things, you're no longer playing with merchants, monks, or marriage-hungry nobles. You're sitting at the centre of a very hot, very gilded frying pan, and the fire is royal favour. Tonight, you're not just rich, you're not just respected, you're not even feared, you're now something far more volatile. You're useful to the crown, and that, as any courtier worth their salt will tell you, is a terminal condition. You arrive at the palace under torchlight, led through hallways filled with armoured silence and side-eyes from stewards who would gladly sell your boots for a whisper of your secrets. The throne room is mostly empty. Just the king, a bishop who looks like he's been awake since the last century, and a scribe so nervous he's chewing the end of his feather. The king looks up, smiles. "Ah," he says, "our favourite pen. We have a task for you." You're not sure if you're flattered or cursed. He wants a treaty written, an important one, between his kingdom and a neighbouring duchy known for its silver mines and suspiciously well-trained border guards. But here's the catch. It must make him look generous, powerful, and completely blameless for the recent incident in which his knights accidentally raided 3 border villages and borrowed 100 sheep. You're given 3 days, a chest of gold, and full access to court records, which to your delight include everything from love letters between rival duchesses to coded notes that may or may not be ordering assassinations via pie. You write the treaty. It's a masterpiece, elegant, vague, and just ambiguous enough that either side can claim victory until the next war, at which point you'll be hired to write the blame into someone else's memoir. The treaty is signed, a peace is declared, the sheep remain missing, and you are rewarded with a new title: Royal Advisor for Affairs of Incan Council. Your responsibilities? Undefined. Your reach? Expanding. Historical fact: medieval kings often surrounded themselves with unofficial advisors, scribes, scholars, clerics, and even court favourites who held no military command but wielded immense influence. Some shaped policy, others just shaped the stories. You quickly discover which kind you are. You're not just writing treaties, you're ghostwriting speeches, drafting laws, composing spontaneous public prayers, and occasionally forging a love poem to smooth over the Queen's opinion of a certain foreign ambassador. You write both sides of every argument before the council even meets. It's exhausting, it's exhilarating, and it's incredibly dangerous, because now everyone wants something from you. One noble wants you to slightly adjust the terms of his family's land grant. A bishop offers you immunity if you'll declare his rival's sermons plagiarized. A duchess invites you to dinner and whispers over goose confit that she has proof the king's brother is plotting treason, and would like a song about it. You smile, nod, and make a note to double the locks on your study door. Quirky fact: court advisors often slept in their clothing. Not for modesty, but in case of sudden exile, arrest, or assassination. You start doing the same. Robe, boots, knife under the pillow, one-pack satchel ready to go. But here's the twist. You're starting to enjoy it. The scheming, the strategy, the knowledge that every scroll passed under the king's nose has your fingerprints on it. When a law is passed doubling grain taxes, you know it was your phrasing that made it palatable. When a rebel leader is hanged, you recognise the wording in the charges, pulled directly from a letter you edited last week. And when a new anthem is sung at the coronation of the king's heir, it's your words ringing out through the cathedral. Debate time. Were royal advisors the brains behind the throne, or simply tools, dressed up in intellect, used and discarded at will? Some say they were visionaries, others glorified ink-slingers. History rarely remembers their names. You're determined to be the exception. You begin leaving clues, a mark here, a phrase there, a signature style only the sharpest eyes would notice, a metaphor about lions, a peculiar fondness for similes involving geese. One day, some future historian will read an official edict and think, this sounds suspiciously like our favourite fake alchemist / toll baron / brothel tycoon. Because you're not just surviving court life, you're shaping it. One scroll at a time, but you also see the cracks forming, whispers, suspicion. The king is aging, his heir is ambitious. And you? You've made too many deals with too many devils. You can feel the wolves circling, dressed in velvet and blessing their wine with half smiles. So you start planning your exit strategy. A safe house, gold hidden in a church wall, a boat waiting in a discreet port, a new identity tucked inside a hollowed-out prayer book. Because royal favour is fickle, and eventually every advisor becomes too clever, too trusted, too dangerous. But for now, you're still in the room, still the whisper in the king's ear, still the hand that moves the pieces while others play the game. And that's worth every sleepless night, every ink-stained hand, every forged signature. As the council gathers, the king looks at you and says, "Shall we begin?" You bow, smile, and reach for your quill. You wake to the sound of coughing, not your own. It's coming from the hallway, from the street, from every window that used to echo with laughter, argument, or singing, and now only seems to echo with lungs struggling not to collapse. You step outside into a world that smells of boiled herbs, candle smoke, and something far worse. The plague is back, and this time, you're going to profit. Because let's be clear, you're not a doctor, and certainly not a priest. You're not here to save anyone's soul, cleanse the water, or explain how miasma works. You're here to sell things that look like salvation. Tonight, you become a plague profiteer, and you're going to make a killing. It starts with charm sales, not charisma, actual charms. Little bags of dried rosemary, sage, garlic, and whatever else your apothecary can scoop into linen before sneezing. You call them plague pouches, blessed by a monk, cursed by a witch, guaranteed to confuse the spirits of rot. You hand one to a noble's wife and charge her the cost of a chicken. For 2, you ask for a goat. She gives you 3. You knew this would work. Historical fact. During outbreaks of plague, especially the Black Death, people scrambled for any kind of protection. Herbs, amulets, rings, and potions quack doctors flourished. So did street-side mystics and sellers of plague cures, most of which range from hilariously useless to fatally ill-advised. You print a handbill claiming your new 7-herb miracle sachets are modelled after a Roman recipe and personally endorsed by a wandering Greek healer named Thessalius, who you made up. You stage a small healing, paying an actor to recover dramatically after sniffing one, and suddenly everyone wants them. You raise the price. Then the graveyards start filling up, which gives you another idea. You go into the burial business, you start modestly. Simple wooden coffins for families who want a proper send-off. But the death rate climbs. People can't keep up. You offer bulk burial plots outside the city, pre-dug, marked with simple wooden crosses sold in pairs for couples who wish to meet again. It's morbid, it's horrible, it's brilliant. You offer upgrades, a pine coffin, a stone marker, a plague-proof blessing from a priest who's mostly drunk and barely awake. You call the service St. Mercy's Sleep. It's dignified, it's spiritual, it's profitable. Your team of gravediggers expands to include 6 former highwaymen, a gravedigger's widow with unusually strong arms, and a boy who can dig a 6-foot hole in under 12 minutes if properly motivated with stew. You start selling pre-need burials. That's right. People pay in advance to reserve a plot just in case. Some even ask to decorate their own future graves. You host a graveyard tour. It sells out. Quirky fact. Some medieval cemeteries did sell pre-dug plots. Entire guilds were formed around burial rites. People would compete to be buried near certain saints, churches, or less noisy corners of the yard. You sell a spot next to a local martyr's elbow bone for the price of a sheep herd. But you're not stopping there. You launch a new product, the Home Plague Kit. It includes a vial of vinegar, a candle shaped like the Virgin Mary, a blessed sponge, it's just wet, and a small bell to ring when you feel symptoms. The bell is meant to warn neighbours. In reality, it's just a way to make your brand echo through the city. Every time someone rings, someone else buys. Then, your masterpiece. You create plague insurance. You draft up scrolls declaring that if a person dies of plague while holding one of your sacred documents, their family will receive compensation. You charge a hefty fee. You don't expect to pay out often. After all, most of the claimants can't read, and very few people hold on to paper during their final fevered moments. It works, too well. One bishop buys 10 policies for his extended family. A merchant tries to sell knockoff documents. You pay a bard to sing a song about the fakes who perished and the smart ones who planned. Your scroll sales double overnight, and here comes the debate. Was profiting off the plague predatory, or simply supply meeting demand? Some historians say these services were necessary. Morbid, yes, but practical. Others say they exploited the vulnerable in their most desperate hour. You say, why not both? You don't ignore the grief. In fact, you host remembrance feasts, food, song, dramatic readings of the names of the lost, some real, some invented for atmosphere people cry. People donate. One widow tips you an entire goat in gratitude. You name it Gregory. He lives in the back of the graveyard and eats the weeds. You're becoming a pillar of the community. Which is hilarious considering you started this plague as the man who once sold a chicken foot as a bishop's pinky. But you're evolving. People come to you not just for goods, but for guidance. They ask what prayers to say, which side of the bed to sleep on, whether garlic is still good if it's weeping. You invent answers. Every day you receive letters from townsfolk asking for holy protection. You start writing plague charms, short rhyming verses that sound ancient, feel sacred, and fit nicely on a scroll. You sign them with a seal shaped like a teardrop. Even the church starts to take notice. One friar accuses you of heresy. You invite him to tour your graveyard. He walks in skeptical, leaves with a jar of your special vinegar and a burial contract for himself and his 4 cats. You sleep well that night, surrounded by coin, scrolls, and a very healthy goat. Because in this dark time, while others count corpses, you count customers, and in the age of death, you've never felt more alive, yet your hands are clean, which ironically makes you more suspicious than most people in town. In an era when grime is considered character, and a bath is only taken when someone dies or marries royalty, your suspiciously minty scent and neat fingernails suggest something unnatural. They're right. Because tonight you're not just a plague profiteer or propaganda peddler. You've entered a new, slippery and delightfully fragrant industry. You're now a medieval cosmetics mogul. Yes, you. With your knowledge of herbs, trade routes, branding, and how to convince people that they smell bad, you've launched the 14th century's hottest luxury, not looking like a corpse. It starts simple. 1 soap. Just one. Well, okay. It's mostly lard, ashes and lavender steeped in goat urine, but you call it moon soap, a purifying touch from the stars. You wrap it in linen stamped with a crescent logo, whisper that it's used by Eastern princesses, and display it next to a statue of Venus that you absolutely stole from a bathhouse. It sells out in a week. You've got to expand. You create moon oil, a skin gloss made from almond oil, rose water, and crushed pearl. You start bottling vinegar scented with herbs and calling it elixir for the blood. You invent a powder for whitening the face, chalk, a hint of lead, and a prayer, and brand it as Snow Maiden's Grace. You don't just sell products, you sell transformation. You sell the illusion of youth, status, untouchable cleanliness. Historical fact: medieval cosmetics were used widely among the upper classes. Lotions, oils, whitening powders, perfumes, and even hair dyes. While some ingredients were harmless, others included toxic compounds like white lead, mercury, and lye. Beauty came at a literal cost and sometimes with a rash. You lean into it. Hard. Your next product line? St. Lucia's Blessings, a 3-piece eye kit, kohl pencil, charcoal, eyelight powder, ground oyster shell, and a tiny silver spoon for application that you claim belonged to a nun who once saw angels. Your target audience? Noble women desperate to look vaguely alive in candlelight. And the men? Oh, you don't forget them. You release nightly tincture, a beard oil infused with cloves and pride. You promise it strengthens chin hair and repels lice and temptation. It flies off the shelves. Soon, everyone wants in. You train beauty stewards to demonstrate products in town squares. You build a bathhouse/showroom in the city centre, where customers can bathe, be powdered, and hear soft lute music while you sell them scented waters for twice the price of ale. Quirky fact: scent was associated with health and virtue. In the Middle Ages, people believed bad smells carried disease, not entirely wrong, and that good smells protected the soul. Nobles carried scented sachets. Perfume was spiritual warfare. You start selling sin-slaying incense as a side hustle, but you're not just selling to nobles anymore. You create tiered product lines. For the wealthy, crystal vials, velvet pouches, imported rose oils. For the commoners, simple clay pots filled with diluted but still sacred versions. You call it Moon Soap, Common Grace Edition. 1 bar per household. You start a subscription model. Monthly soap deliveries with seasonal scent options. Rosemary in spring, myrrh in winter, garlic lavender for plague season. It's not pleasant, but it feels protective. You are everywhere. Taverns carry your bath vinegar. Courtiers carry your lip balm, St. Magdalen's Mercy, for the devout and kissable. Monks claim your powder makes their tonsures more radiant under torchlight. Then, your most dangerous move yet, cosmetic consultations. You open a small parlour where customers, wealthy, noble or ambitious, can sit down and receive personalised beauty recommendations. You charge a fee, take notes on skin tone, tooth state, and emotional fragrance alignment. Then you prescribe products. Sometimes you make them up on the spot, but it feels bespoke. A merchant's daughter with terrible acne becomes your walking advertisement after you give her a honey lavender salve and whisper, "Patience is the root of all radiance." She tells everyone. You sell 50 jars the next day. Debate time. Did medieval beauty standards empower or restrict? Some historians argue that cosmetics allowed expression and status signalling, especially for women. Others note the toxicity, the pressure to appear pure, and how some ingredients physically harm the users. You say, prophet doesn't care about pores. Eventually a priest preaches against you, claims vanity is a sin, that your moon oil leads to moral decay and ungodly yearning. You send him a free piety powder set, charcoal for the lashes, rose balm for the lips, and a scroll on how St. Clair used herbs to honour the Lord through luminous presentation. He becomes a secret customer. Now you're dealing with royalty. The Queen's maid writes you in code, requesting a private blend to lighten the royal complexion without burning. You create a paste using ground eggshell, powdered poppy, goat milk, and the tears of someone who's seen 5 weddings and no affection. She orders more within the week. You now have clients in 5 cities, including 3 rival duchesses, 2 bishops' sisters, and 1 assassin who simply wants to look less exhausted. You're no longer just a merchant, you're a beauty oracle. People quote your slogans like scripture. Moon soap keeps the devil out of your pores. Face thy sins, but moisturize afterward. And of course your best-selling product's motto, smell like heaven, even if you're going elsewhere. You sit back in your parlour, counting coins while your perfumers argue over whether cinnamon or myrrh smells more like forgiveness. You don't care. You're inventing a line of shimmering powders called celestial dust that promises to make your skin glow with the light of revelation. And as you glance at your reflection in a polished silver plate, one thing becomes clear. You didn't just clean up the cosmetics game, you made it divine. The wine is poured, the bread is broken, the feast is underway, and you, as usual, are sitting near, but not too near, the head of the table. Just close enough to smile knowingly when someone makes a clever toast, and just far enough that no one notices when you don't actually eat the fish stew. Because you know what's in it. You paid for it. Tonight, you're not the one being served, you are the master of the menu. Welcome to your latest empire, feasting and food fraud. Yes, food. That timeless currency of joy, survival, and unrelenting social performance. And in the Middle Ages, a feast isn't just a meal, it's a declaration of power. A noble's prestige isn't measured by his sword, or even his land, but by how many exotic meats and questionable sauces he can cram onto one plate before passing out in front of a minstrel. And who controls the feast? You do. It all starts when a noble throws a wedding and hires you, not as a planner, oh no, as a culinary experience architect. You like the sound of that. It's just vague enough to mean everything. You suggest a theme, the Garden of Paradise. Guests enter through a tunnel of rosemary smoke. Dancers dressed as angels throw flower petals. The main course, a whole roasted peacock stuffed with a goose, stuffed with a duck, stuffed with a quail. Stuffed birds within birds. You're inventing the medieval turducken. The crowd loses its mind. You charge 3 times what they expected. They pay 5 just to say they were there. Historical fact. Grand feasts were crucial displays of wealth and influence. Nobles would hire entire staging teams, cooks, decorators, musicians, even scent designers, to create edible spectacles. Dishes included roasted swan served in its own feathers, pies filled with live birds, and jelly towers shaped like castles. You take the concept and run. You introduce menu illusions, food that looks like something else, apples made of marzipan, boiled eggs dyed to look like rubies, a meat flour carved from salted lamb and garnished with pomegranate seeds and edible gold. You call it culinary symbolism. Others call it witchcraft. Either way, it sells, and then you go international. You partner with traders to bring in exotic ingredients. Spices from Alexandria, or at least the guy who claims they are. Sugar from Sicily. Figs from somewhere vaguely described as the East. You repackage everything under dramatic names. Phoenix powder equals mildly spiced cinnamon. Elven honey equals fermented pear syrup. Tears of St. Bridget equals just salt in a fancy box. You open a storefront called the Gilded Fork. It's part apothecary, part food boutique, and part theatre. You hire a blindfolded taste tester named Ludo, who shouts dramatic reviews like, "It tastes like judgment," and "This pie has layers of regret." He's very popular. You start selling party kits, sealed baskets that include a meal plan, custom table prayers, scented candles, and handwritten poems for guests to pretend they wrote. It becomes the thing to give newlyweds, grieving widows, and bored archbishops. Your clients begin to compete. One noble demands a roast stag filled with live doves. Another requests a jelly sculpture of himself. One merchant insists you create a banquet themed after the 7 deadly sins, with each course representing a different vice. Your course for lust includes oysters, wine, and a fig tart so suggestive it gets you banned from one duchy for culinary obscenity. You frame the letter. Quirky fact. Food laws were practically non-existent in most of medieval Europe. This meant that sellers often dyed old meat, mixed stale flour with chalk, or used ground bones to bulk up spice blends. You introduced truth labels purely for branding, tiny parchment tags that say things like, 100% real nutmeg, probably. Now let's talk about the money. You start licensing your menus to other feasts, selling spice blends under your name, publishing a cookbook that's actually just a list of your most ridiculous dishes with completely unusable recipes. Begin by singing to the broth for 3 hours. You don't care, it's a bestseller. You host an annual event, the Midnight Banquet, invitation only, held at a secret location. Guests must arrive in masks and vow to try everything, no matter how strange. Last year's menu included roasted crow, wine cooled in snow, candied rose petals, and a soup served inside a hollowed-out loaf of bread shaped like a screaming face. No one left hungry, some didn't leave at all. And here's your debate. Were medieval feasts truly about food, or were they just performances of power? Some scholars argue that the elaborate dishes were more about status than sustenance. Others insist it was a genuine celebration of culture, connection and flavour. You say it was dinner theatre, and the nobles were paying to be the audience and the actors. Then one day the Queen writes to you, not formally, a private letter. She's tired of tasteless fare, of boring sauces, of roast chicken day after day like some peasant cursed to dine forever in beige. She wants passion. She wants fire. You send her a banquet plan that includes roasted pheasant in cherry glaze, dragon's breath broth, spiced with enough cloves to knock out a horse, and a tart called the Bitter Widow that literally makes your lips tingle. She loves it. She asks for weekly deliveries. You become Her Majesty's taster of the unusual, which is both a title and a legal shield if anyone ever gets food poisoning. You're at the peak now, a royal client list, a reputation as a culinary genius, a performer of edible magic, and a master manipulator of taste and status. You've turned hunger into art, flavour into currency, and appetite into power. As you stand at the back of your latest feast, a glittering hall filled with nobles gorging themselves on powdered swan wings and marzipan frogs that croak when bitten, you raise a goblet and smile. Because they don't just eat what you give them, they eat what you tell them it means. You smell wax and cold stone, the kind of cold that doesn't fade even in summer, the kind that's seeped into the walls for centuries, like the sighs of bored bishops and the whispered sins of confessors who drank too much mead the night before Easter. A soft echo follows your footsteps as you walk under vaulted ceilings, past statues with hollow eyes. You're not here to pray. You're here to cash in on belief one final time. Because now, at the height of your mischief-soaked career, you've gone full circle. You've become a church fixer, not a priest, not an abbot, not even a cardinal's cousin with suspiciously expensive boots. Number. You are the person churches call when their reputation needs divine intervention, and their coffers need a miracle. The irony isn't lost on you. You who once sold relics made from pig bones and soap shaped like saints, now sit in sacred chambers advising men in robes on how to revive public enthusiasm for salvation. And of course, donation revenues. It starts with a letter from the monastery of St. Aelred's Rib, a minor place, dusty, forgotten. Their annual pilgrimage attendance has dropped. Tithes have dried up. The relic, an old femur, probably real, definitely boring. You arrive, assess the situation. The monks greet you nervously. You're a mix of legend and scandal by now. Some see you as a fraud wrapped in velvet. Others whisper that you've been touched by divine wisdom, or at least very clever demons. You don't correct them. You walk the grounds, you inspect the relic, you sniff the air for opportunity, and then you say, "You need a miracle." The monks pale. You smile. Historical fact. The medieval church often leaned into miracles to boost attendance and prestige. Visions, weeping statues, incorrupt bodies, these signs were frequently exploited to attract pilgrims and donations. Some were believed, some were encouraged. You get to work, you stage a subtle event. One morning, a monk finds the old femur glowing faintly. Thank a clever mixture of crushed fireflies and phosphorescent fish oil hidden in a brass casing. That same evening, a local shepherd claims to have dreamt of St. Aelred, weeping over the lost souls of the valley. You print a scroll, release a ballad, stage a nighttime vigil where a star happens to fall during the prayer chant. Actually, one of your apprentices releasing a glowing kite soaked in pitch. Suddenly pilgrims flood in, they kneel, they pray, they drop coins into the offering box like it's going out of style. The monks are stunned. You're already drafting plans for the new pilgrimage centre, complete with guest rooms, a gift shop and limited edition holy water in bottles shaped like sheep. You take a 15% cut, they call it a consultant's blessing, and the word spreads. Soon, you're travelling from abbey to cathedral whispering solutions into tired ears. A bishop wants to boost Sunday attendance. You write a sermon so rousing people cry halfway through and drop their last copper into the offering bowl out of sheer emotional confusion. A convent can't afford repairs. You stage a vision of St. Margaret in a laundry tub and sell the water as tears of humble joy. A cathedral is falling out of fashion. You invent a relic, a tooth of John the Baptist's donkey, and get two poets to write dueling sonnets about its symbolism. You become a spiritual branding expert. Quirky fact. Some medieval relics were wildly implausible, like the milk of the Virgin Mary sold in powdered form, or the feather of the Holy Spirit, which suspiciously resembled goose down. You start compiling these into a collector's pamphlet called Treasures of Heaven. That might not be. It's a hit. And here's where it gets weirder. You're approached by a heretical sect. Secretive, yes, but well-funded. They want you to help them craft a story, a structure, a mythos, not to destroy the church, but to compete with it. You decline, but you do sell them a relic. A piece of charred wood, you say, came from the Tree of Doubt. They pay double, but the church, it loves you now. Sort of. They won't name you a saint, but they will keep calling. You're invited to councils, whispered meetings behind cathedrals, discussions about relics, indulgences, public morality campaigns. You start recommending sacred theatre, plays with miracle plots, healing scenes, floating angels on ropes. One time the rope breaks and the angel sprains an ankle, but the crowd thinks it's part of the act and throws coins. You write psalm-like songs for pilgrims to hum as they drop offerings. They're catchy. So catchy that travelling merchants start singing them at taverns. Now you're collecting royalties on religious jingles. But here comes your final debate. Did you elevate belief or cheapen it? Some will say you gave people what they wanted. A sense of wonder, meaning, hope in exchange for a handful of copper. Others will say you tricked them. Gilded lies, spiritual theatre. You say, they lit the candles. I just handed them the match. And deep down you wonder, does it matter if a miracle is faked, if it still comforts someone? You never answer that. But your next project? It's your legacy. You commission a mausoleum, not a tomb, a temple. It'll house your story, scrolls, relics, inventions. The robe you wore when you posed as a miracle broker, the original glowing femur, a jar labelled Saint Prophetess Final Whisper. You hire a monk to write your biography, full of riddles, satire, and divine ambiguity. He calls you the Holy Trickster. You like that. As you walk through a quiet cathedral one evening, empty except for your echo and a cleaning boy humming one of your psalms, you pause at a statue of an unknown saint its face has worn away. The nameplate is scratched and you think, one day. Someone might do the same before a statue of you, offer a coin, whisper a wish, or laugh, because you made history laugh, and then paid for dinner. The moon is high now, quiet and silver, brushing across rooftops, chapel spires, and the empty market stalls where your name still echoes, softly, like a secret passed from coin to hand. The city sleeps, but it doesn't forget. You've lived 30 lives in one: merchant, spy, relic hustler, soap tycoon, dinner party menace, miracle manufacturer. You walked into the Middle Ages with nothing but nerve, wit, and a very flexible relationship with the truth, and you emerged filthy, ridiculously rich, not just in gold, not just in land, but in stories. You rewrote the rules, reshaped history, and built an empire from whatever was lying around. Bones, ink, gossip, grease, desire, and a disturbingly effective goat named Gregory. And you didn't just survive the chaos of medieval life, you monetized it. Now the halls are quiet, the fires burn low, your scrolls are written, your disguises folded and tucked away, your last feast long since cleared. Somewhere a bard is singing about you, badly, off-key, but the people love it. A little boy sells a St. Longinus finger bone that looks suspiciously like a walnut. A noblewoman applies rose balm and whispers a line from your fake poem as if it's scripture. A jester in a distant court juggles apples while telling your jokes, and a scribe signs a decree with your signature flair. You didn't just win the game, you rebranded it. And now, as the city dreams, you close your eyes too. Let the bells ring. Let the coins roll. Let the legends grow taller every year. You earned it. And you know what? If heaven has a toll gate, you've already greased the guard. Sweet dreams, schemer. You deserve the softest pillow in the world.